Living versus Zombies, the End of the Epidemic. Chapter 1. Subotnik. The sun crawled lazily over the horizon, as if reluctant to leave for its tedious work. Morning revealed what the night had concealed. The dead. Dawn reeked of the stench of corpses. Max rose from his chair, stretched a bit, unscrewed the lid of his thermos and poured himself a mug of hot tea. The teenager sat in the watch house on the second floor of an unfinished house. The owl watched the entrance to the village, waiting to be relieved. As far as the eye could see, corpses lay strewn across the road and in the field, with crows hopping leisurely among them, their bellies already full of carrion. Yesterday was a difficult day, and for some, it was their last. The humans slaughtered a huge crowd of infected and retained control of the village. For a time. No one knew when the next zombie attack would come, or how many enemies would arrive this time. The sun rose over the distant treetops. The radio hissed, and Andre's monotonous grumbling could be heard. "Owl, do you copy? Report the situation. Over." "The situation is normal. The corpses are lying there, showing no signs of waking up, and there are no new cannons in sight yet. And you're welcome." "Okay, you'll be relieved in about 15 minutes. The radio clicked. The teenager assumed a prone position and began doing push-ups. He often did this at the end of his shift to perk up. 45, 46, 40, Max whispered through gritted teeth, but he couldn't reach the 50 push-up mark today. He waved his tired arms a little and leaned out the window. "It's a warm autumn here, lovely. And in Siberia it'll probably start snowing soon," thought Owl, squinting in the bright rays. Soon, voices were heard downstairs. Quiet footsteps echoed on the stairs, and Kasusha ascended to the second floor. "Hello." "Hello," Max answered a little embarrassedly. "Are you going to replace me?" "Well, yes. My name is Ksenia. We didn't have time to meet yesterday." Max, well, my friends also call me Owl." The boy awkwardly extended his hand, but the girl shook his hand without hesitation. Max noticed her the moment he saw her. These days, it's not every day you meet a pretty girl, especially one almost her own age. But yesterday, there was no time for introductions. They were busy clearing the village of wounded zombies, burying the Greek, and then everyone was so tired they went to bed. Everyone, that is, except the duty officers. Owl had the last watch before dawn. "Well, you go and rest. I'll see you later," the girl shrugged, not knowing what else to add. "Uh-huh. Here's the radio. Do you know how to use it?" "Damn, that's a stupid question. Why did you ask that?" The guy immediately scolded himself mentally. "I can. Bye. See you in the evening." Max descended the stairs and stepped out into the courtyard. He wanted to chat with Kasusha some more, but the romance had to wait until better times. The men were already waiting outside. Everyone who could stand up had gathered early in the morning for the cleanup day, as Fyodor called it. Only Boris remained on sick leave. With a knocked-out eye and a severe concussion, the border guard was not yet fit to assist. "So, how are you? Are you sleepy?" Ivan asked, looking at his friend's tousled head of hair. The owl yawned, but assured that he would easily stay on his feet until lunch. "Good. The eyes are afraid." but the hands are doing it. We need to quickly get rid of these dead men before all sorts of infections start from them. The Cossack kicked the blue ear. Severed and torn pieces of rotting flesh lay scattered here and there on the ground. Yesterday, my eyes were more scared when these creatures were running instead of lying down, Gorik noted. Wait, I wouldn't be in such a hurry. Let's search them. Look over there. Kuznetsov approached the charred body and tore the gold chain off the dead man. Lyoka winced and glanced sideways at his father. Fyodor's brow furrowed in displeasure. Andrei twirled the trophy in the air, wrapped it around his index finger, and stuffed it in his pocket. Don't be disdainful. These things made our lives a lot easier when we were going through the locks. We even bought weapons with them. Let's just say the Elans should somehow compensate for the ammo we spent on them. Fyodor understood his new acquaintance's logic, but he still felt disgusted by the idea of removing jewelry from corpses. If we search everyone like this, we won't bury them all in a week. It'll backfire. There'll be an outbreak of typhus or some other cholera. Let's agree. Everything you find and take is yours, but we'll follow the plan. Tractor, pit, fire. We agreed. Let's get down to business. Vorobyov was already tired of this chatter. The friends decided to stay put in Dalny for a while before heading to the sea, so they agreed to help clear out the dead. Gorik promised to show them the way to Dagomis and, if possible, find a ship. They quickly established useful contacts with the locals. All it took was saving them from a huge crowd of infected, and, as it turned out, not only with the locals. The friends recognized a wounded, battered, bearded man with a broken nose as President Lev Nikolaevich Kornilov. Life continued to throw up surprises. While Fyodor, under the cover of Lyoka and Gorik, refueled the tractor, Max, Ivan, and Andrei rummaged through the nearby corpses, collecting everything of value, right down to their good shoes. Some of the corpses were swollen in the sun in excellent sneakers, and the boys decided that throwing away such treasures would be a waste. Wow, these slippers cost about 50,000. I had a classmate who drove around in those. He was rich, his parents were rich, he could afford them. Max said, pulling the expensive sneakers off a half-naked, pot-bellied man. Andrei turned the shoes over in his hands, assessing them. Yeah, they're cool. Just a size 14. They're a bit big for you. Oh well, we can trade it for something. Barter is everything to us now, Owl replied optimistically. Once they'd refueled the tractor and confirmed it was in good working order, they set about restoring the fence. The zombies only knocked down one span, and the job was completed quickly. We need to strengthen the structure, build another perimeter. It's not a given that such an invasion won't happen again, the Cossack said, clearing his throat as he shook his hands. Yes, it wouldn't hurt. Andrei agreed, looking closely at Fyodor. How are you feeling? Do you have a fever? Are you shivering? Ugh, you mean the fever? No, thank God, he's fine for now. Everything hurts, of course, after yesterday's mess, but that's different. I hope your medicine helps Borya. The Cossacks still couldn't believe these vagabonds had an antiviral, but none of the wounded objected when they were injected with the vaccine. It couldn't have gotten any worse anyway. Andrei raised his voice slightly, addressing everyone. I repeat, if you feel unwell, report it immediately. You know the symptoms. It's good that you had a rabies vaccination, but who knows how your body will react after a bite and the virus entering your bloodstream. Unexpectedly encountering the former president of the former country among the village's residents, Andrei and Masha decided to reveal some information about the vaccine to their new allies. Lev Nikolaevich immediately suggested they begin research and development of the antivirus in the bunker's lab. The friends conferred, but agreed that they could begin this after they completed one other task. The case concerned Vorobyov's parents. When the epidemic began spreading at breakneck speed, they were vacationing in Gelendzhik. A quarantine was imposed, and the parents were unable to return from the resort. And then contact was lost. Ivan knew the chances of finding them were slim, but he had to try. A faint, warm breeze blew from the south. The sea lapped far away, but the cosmonaut thought he could smell its salty scent. However, this only lasted for a few moments. The stench of the dead spread across the field and grew stronger, drowning out all other scents. Max leaned over a skinny brunette with a large hole in her stomach. Flies were crawling excitedly over her wounds, burrowing into her nose, mouth, and ears, trying to lay as many eggs as possible. Suppressing the urge to vomit, the boy tore off the dead woman's large gold earrings, turned away and held his nose. Fyodor looked at the hundreds of corpses in confusion and scratched the back of his head in bewilderment. So, we won't bury them here. We'll need this clearing for arable land. There's no need for this vermin to rot right next to us. Let's take them to the forest. There's a clearing nearby. We'll bury them there. Dad, how are we going to get them there? Should we rake them all up with a tractor? The Cossack ran his thumb over his mustache, mentally agreed with Lyoka, and looked towards the village. We'll have to transport them by car. We have 2 pickup trucks. They can fit through the clearing. First, we'll clear the street of the dead. Then we'll use a tractor to clear the road. It'll take a while, of course, but it's better this way. People laugh at rushing things too fast. They needed it faster, but now they don't. Andrei grinned, but remained silent. The men discussed the plan of action and the work began in earnest. Max and the president were placed behind the wheel. Lev Nikolaevich, with a broken rib, couldn't lift heavy objects, but he was perfectly capable of driving. Andrei, Ivan, Gorik, and Lyoka threw the bodies into the back of the pickup trucks, and the trucks drove them to the forest. There, at the edge of the forest, Fyodor dug a huge hole with a tractor, gradually shoveling the bodies into it. By evening, the men were exhausted, and only half the field had been harvested. The sun was rapidly sinking toward the horizon, giving way to the moon's shift in the sky. Disturbed crows had occupied all the nearby trees, cawing discontentedly as their supply of fresh carrion was buried. The cleanup continued the next morning, but it wasn't until the 3rd day that the area was completely cleared of the dead. Fortunately, almost no one distracted the people from their work. During the entire time, only a few infected emerged from the forest at the sound of the tractor and immediately descended into a zombie mass grave. And on the 4th night, rain began to fall. The water washed away the traces of blood on the ground and grass. Even the air became fresher. The stench of corpses gradually dissipated. Dalny returned to its former life. It seemed as if the infected had never invaded the village, but the enormous burial mound in the forest and the small grave of Midas reminded people of that terrible day. Chapter 2. Sitting by the river. 3 sparrows chirped merrily in a shallow puddle, cheerfully chirping about their bird business. Voices were heard, then footsteps and the clatter of claws on the asphalt. The birds timidly took flight and disappeared into the lilac branches. Pyotr led Agatha on a leash, and Ksyusha walked alongside, eating boiled corn for breakfast. Your bruise seems to have gotten smaller. Are the bites healing and not festering? It's fine. The swelling's gone down and it's healing. And the black eye? Well, I've even gotten used to it, the boy yawned. How is Dad? Is he feeling better? The shepherd suddenly stopped and began sniffing the fence enthusiastically. Petya tugged the dog's collar. It's noticeable that the rib hurts and wrinkles, but it doesn't complain much. Masha said it will heal in about 3 weeks if I don't put any stress on it. Masha. I like her, she's so kind. I like them all right away. I don't even know what we'd do without them. Digested in zombie stomachs. Or would have become one ourselves. Better not talk about it. Siusha winced. The girl chatted carefree with the president's son, oblivious to the social gulf that had recently separated them. However, Pyotr had never been arrogant about his status, so he quickly adapted to the simple life of a human being. He had once dreamed of becoming a tennis player, but now a racket couldn't earn a living, and he hadn't yet decided on a new profession. Petya had considered blacksmithing, but no one had yet been able to teach him that. The teenagers approached the house where their new friends were staying. The boy cupped his hands and shouted, "Max! Lena!" Owl's sleepy face appeared behind the glass. The window opened and the teenager leaned out. "Hello, what time is it?" "It's time to go for a walk, Agatha, before he makes a mess here, right under your windows. We've arrived as we agreed. Are you coming?" "Let's go, of course." "Damn, we overslept." "Damn, give me a couple of minutes. I'll wake Lenka up now." While his sister was waking up, Max quickly pulled on shorts and a wrinkled t-shirt, attached a set of throwing knives, which he never parted with, to his belt, and picked up a machine gun. 10 minutes later, the teenagers and the dog headed toward the river. They climbed over the barricade at the village exit and descended a gentle green slope. Almost immediately on the opposite bank, the forest began. Pine, juniper, dwarf oak, hornbeam, beech, and other trees grew close together, providing food and shelter for many animals in the area. Agatha was let off the leash. The dog relieved himself, then joyfully ran belly deep into the river and began lapping up the water. Max approached the pedestrian bridge, which was tightly bound with barbed wire. He looked at the barrier dubiously and touched the sharp metal spike. "Khanum can't get through here, but a person can if they want to. There are no people here. It's a remote place. To the north there's only forest, and beyond that, mountains. All the life is in the south, down to the sea." "That's how we survived," Ksiusha explained, sitting down on the grass. "We, on the contrary, are going to the coast," Lena said with slight anxiety. "We need to go to Gelenjik." "It's not a fact that it's us. You definitely have no business there," my brother interrupted. "In terms of?" "Most likely the three of us, Vanka, Andreyuka, and I will go. The rest will wait here." The girl immediately became indignant. "Well, we all agreed to stick together. Have you forgotten already?" "It's a safety issue. Once you learn to shoot, then we'll talk." "Well then, teach me," Lena demanded, looking defiantly at Max. The teenager spread his hands and looked away. "Damn, we're already short on ammo. I'll teach you some before I have anything to shoot myself." While the Savolyevs were arguing, Pyotr picked up a stick, waved it in the air, and tossed it into the shallows. Agat joyfully lunged for the toy. The dog grabbed the branch with his powerful jaws and snapped it in half. The president's son turned away from the dog and joined the conversation. "We have weapons in the bunker. We took some, but there's still some left. So, I think we've sorted out the ammunition issue." Max and Lena exclaimed as if on command. "Super!" "Then teach me too," Ksiusha immediately demanded. Owl met her gaze, looked slightly embarrassed, and nodded. "We'll teach you. Everyone needs to know how to shoot." Agate returned with a stub of a stick. The dog nudged Lena's thigh with his wet nose, snorted, looked at Petka, stuck out his tongue, and began to pant invitingly, demanding that they continue the game. The boy looked around, searching for a suitable piece of wood. You can't get enough sticks. You'll chew one and lose the other. Okay, right now, just wait. Pyotr walked over to a young willow and began breaking off a new branch. Lena adjusted her hair, and Ksyusha offered to braid her hair. Max watched the girls, occasionally glancing at the opposite bank. You'll come back here after Galenzik, right? It's wonderful here. The sea is nice too, of course, but it's dangerous. We need to wait until the zombies die out, that's what Mom says. Ksyusha carefully braided her new friend's locks into thin, even braids. Agate flew past them like lightning, chasing a stick. Owl scratched his leg and glanced furtively at the girl. Max was beginning to fall in love, but he didn't show it. We were actually dreaming of finding a house by the sea in a small village, killing all the cons there, and living like we were at a resort. Or moving to the Mediterranean, or maybe even further, to a tropical island. Where there are tropical islands, there are tropical diseases, Ksyusha objected. Well, people did live there after all. But it's always warm, there's fruit, and you can hunt and fish. Max pulled out a throwing blade and ran it across his neck as if shaving. Lena noticed her brother was showing off, understood, and giggled. That's possible here too. The girl continued to press her point. There's even trout in this river. And in the forest there are hares, wild boars, roe deer, and other game. I like your travel plans. I love adventure, Petka agreed with his friend. We'll have to put off traveling for now, Owl frowned. When we get back, Andrei and Masha will start working on the antivirus in the lab. Your dad said the bunker has everything we need for that. Is it cool there, by the way? Like in sci-fi movies, huh? The boy recalled his experiences living in the shelter. The time when Chernov came to power was particularly vividly etched in his memory. Cool was the last word to describe those feelings. You know, Max, it might be cool there for the first 3 days. But then it all gets boring real quick. It's annoying, like living in a tin can. If the vaccine works, people will flee this bunker right away. What about the zombies? They're no big deal in the shelter, but on the surface? Ksyusha continued to work on Lena's hair, listening with interest to the boys. Well, some will stay, those who like this kind of life. But it's better to fight zombies than to rot in this dungeon. Agate returned with a stick and sprawled out on the grass. The shepherd demonstratively chewed on his trophy, glancing at the teenagers. Owl scratched the dog behind the ear, careful not to touch the bald spots. They say it'll heal like a dog. His wounds heal quickly. When we settle down, we'll get ourselves a beast like that too. Right, Lenka? Well, you can, but I like Labradors better. And I'll have a Jack Russell Terrier. They're small but cool. They're useless in a fight though, although if they grab you by the balls, even a zombie would get into trouble. Max grinned, met Ksyusha's gaze and assumed a serious expression again. The sun was rising and blazing hot. Agate went for a swim again, and at that moment the bushes on the opposite bank began to rustle. The boys immediately grabbed their weapons. Everyone peered tensely into the green thicket, expecting the appearance of the infected or some other danger. A cuckoo could be heard somewhere in the distance, but no one wanted to ask how long he had left to live. The dog also froze and sniffed anxiously. "Maybe we should shoot there as a precaution," suggested Peter. "I don't want to waste a bullet, and I don't want to make any unnecessary noise." The zombie would have shown up by now, but he can't get across the river. If he doesn't show up, it's either an animal or a person. Lena finished her brother's sentence. A few more minutes passed. No one appeared, and the bushes no longer swayed. Max suggested crossing to the other bank and checking, but everyone tried to dissuade him, especially Siusha. "Okay, I hope it was a hare. I just need to tell Uncle Fedya. Let's get out of here." Petka lowered the pistol and turned away from the river. The friends quickly climbed the slope and disappeared into the far bank. And from the opposite bank, a pair of eyes watched them closely. The cuckoo fell silent, stopping its count. Chapter 3. Hermits. The roar in the kettle grew louder. A faintly plaintive whistle issued from the spout. A couple of minutes later, the water boiled and began hissing as it splashed onto the red-hot stove. Flames peeked brazenly out from behind the firebox door, and the logs crackled as if they weren't burning but breaking. Albert Borisovich always heated the house well in the morning. In recent days, he rarely got up at night to add more wood. By morning, the logs were reduced to ashes and the house quickly cooled. But overall, the house was well built, draft-free, and even cozy. Numerous bunches of dried aromatic herbs for tea hung from the ceiling. Warm rugs made from animal skins lay on the floor. The scent of cedar, mixed with the light smoke from the stove, created a special atmosphere. The windows were small, so even on a clear sunny day the rooms were twilight. However, when people went outside, the light was simply blinding, especially now that the ground was covered in a white blanket of snow. "I'll go get some more water. I'll put it on to warm up for the dishes." Kaimovich coughed into his fist and pulled on his felt boots. Tanya looked out the window, which was covered in a thin, frosty web. It had warmed up a bit today, but the snow still hadn't melted and, as her mentor had said, was here to stay until spring. She remembered it being warmer in Novosibirsk at this time, with mostly drizzling rain. But in the mountains, winter came earlier and left later. A minute later, the door creaked and slammed shut. The room felt the frosty breath of the street. Even the wood in the stove roared more cheerfully, receiving a fresh influx of oxygen. Tanya sat in her sweater and warm pants, but she still felt a momentary chill. The professor placed 2 buckets of icy cold water on the floor by the threshold. A stream flowed next to the house. Venya said it never froze even in the most severe frosts. The girl often remembered the kind, cheerful inspector who had so unexpectedly become infected. Kaimovich still blamed himself. But even more than that, Tanya missed Dodge. His grave was now a small, snow-covered mound. After the dog's death, the always taciturn Albert Borisovich withdrew completely. He barely spoke to the girl for 2 weeks, opening his mouth only in the most dire circumstances. But gradually the pain of losing his best friend began to dull, and little by little the scientist came to his senses. The mentor never blamed Tanya directly, but at times the little girl felt as if he hated her for letting the boxer out on that fateful day. "What shall we cook today? Rabbit with noodles or fish soup?" The professor shook the frost from his beard and mustache. He had completely stopped shaving and was looking more and more like a sullen Father Frost. "How about some mushroom soup? We haven't made it in a while. I could eat that." "Mushroom, so mushroom. Pour some water into the green saucepan for now." The girl grabbed a ladle and Albert Borisovich untied a large sack and pulled out a packet of dried mushrooms. Their taiga mushroom soup recipe was unique. They'd run out of potatoes, So they'd substitute noodles. And instead of fresh vegetables, they'd use dried soup concentrate from Venya's old stock. But they'd added plenty of meat, so the broth was rich and filling. Aren't you going hunting today? The wind is picking up. I think a blizzard is coming. We have enough game. I'll stay home for now. Kaimovich wiped his glasses and opened a new bag of noodles. Now we'll have some tea. Put the soup on to boil. And then get to homework. The professor tried to establish a kind of homeschooling for the girl. Tanya read every day, practiced arithmetic, and could give any high school student a run for her money when it came to plants and animals. The little girl wore out books on the flora and fauna of Siberia, found in Venya's small but useful library. Kaimovich recited the basics of geography and history from memory, and long walks in the forest served as her physical education. I won't teach you computer science. I barely know any languages. And you won't need to solve logarithms and integrals. But how to bandage a wound, mend a fracture, which berries are edible and which aren't, and how to light a fire. Those are the most useful subjects right now. And shoot? After the wolves attacked Dodge, Tanya wanted to learn how to handle a gun. Even zombies didn't frighten her so much. She could outrun them, trick them, even kill them with a knife. But the fast, smart, and calculating wolves sent shivers down her spine. I'll teach you. Get a little stronger. And we'll train in the spring, the mentor promised evasively. He himself understood that he couldn't survive without this skill. But there was no suitable weapon for the girl yet. I wish she had a small-bore rifle or a pistol. How could she fire from such guns? She'd break her collarbone, thought the professor, looking at the thin, frail Tanya. But the girl was quite knowledgeable about technology. She knew how to load and clean guns, what calibers worked best, what to use for rabbit hunting, and what cartridge to use to fend off a bear if necessary. Tanya grew up smart, diligent, and curious. But Kaimovich couldn't answer all her questions. If we get back to town, we'll rob a library. You need to read more. And practice, of course. Will we be socializing with other people? The girl missed the fun company and children's games. Her parents used to throw loud parties, inviting friends with their children. Tanya was a friend of many in the neighborhood. She loved socializing and making new acquaintances. We'll see. It depends on what kind of people they are. The mentor frowned. We haven't had much luck in that regard. You don't want to hang out with people like that old woman Galia, or whatever her name was, do you? Baba Zina. Brr. I had a nightmare about her recently. The little girl recalled the evil, sullen old woman who became her overseer in the village of Berkuta. That's exactly what I'm talking about. There are very few people left, and even fewer good people. You have to rely only on yourself. And that uncle we met here in the forest? Albert Borisovich recalled the face of Zheka, the shelter's host, whom they'd encountered on the way to this base. Kaimovich wanted to get rid of this neighbor, but his home was a 2-day trek away. And on skis, with long climbs and descents. Venya's snowmobile wouldn't start for some reason. The professor spent a couple of days tinkering with it, but couldn't revive it. And the horse could easily break its legs on the slippery, steep trails. The scientist was afraid to undertake such a risky journey and leave the girl unattended. He hoped the Shoran wouldn't venture into his territory either. Wandering alone, unarmed, in these parts was dangerous. Several times a week they heard wolves howling at night, sometimes quiet and distant, sometimes very close. At such times, despite the safe haven, fear chilled them to the bone. They knew the seasoned male who had mauled Dodge continued to prowl the area. Kaimovich sensed the gray predator was waiting for the opportune moment to avenge the she-wolf. The professor also wanted revenge, but the beast was too cunning and cautious for an inexperienced hunter like Albert Borisovich. Recalling the wolf, the scientist thought of his shelter host. It would be nice if the gray one met this Zheka in the forest. I wouldn't have to get my hands dirty. But out loud he said something completely different. That guy lives far away, and I don't think he's the right company for us. Tanya didn't really expect any other answer. The little girl could see that her mentor didn't like people. He was a loner by nature, and seemed to have dreamed his whole life of becoming a hermit in such a remote place. Will we return to Novosibirsk in the spring? The girl remembered the professor's promise when they left the city. Kaimovich stood up and threw some dried oregano, chamomile, and blueberry leaves into the teapot. We need to survive the winter. Once the snow melts, then we'll decide. The house filled with the aroma of herbal tea. Tanya pressed her nose to the cool glass. Snowflakes were falling outside. The sky, the earth, and the air, everything turned white. In such weather it was pleasant to sit by the hot stove, under a blanket with a mug of hot tea, reading a book, and gazing out the window. I'll go and throw some more food to the animals before the path gets blocked. The scientist pulled his hat on and went out. With the arrival of winter, the work increased. Now they had to constantly clear the porch, the paths to the stream, the bathhouse, the flock, and the toilet. But it was a very small price to pay for safety and peace. Not a single zombie would be able to get here again. A few minutes later, Tanya heard loud footsteps on the porch. Her mentor had returned, kicking snow off his felt boots. By the time he arrived, the girl had set 2 mugs of tea, pine nuts, and frozen blueberries on the table. A snowstorm is starting. It's getting colder. Soon the wind picked up. It howled under the roof and hurled handfuls of snowflakes at the window. The scientist threw a few more logs into the firebox. The mushroom soup broth began to boil on the stove, and the room was filled with the scent of the young boar the professor had recently shot. Suddenly, the serenity of the taiga hermits was shattered by a demanding knock on the door. Kaimovich grabbed his rifle and gestured for the girl to hide on the 2nd floor. The knock was repeated, followed by a voice. "Open up, it's me, Zheka from the Bear's Ear." "You'll remember it, and it'll come up," the professor grumbled, reluctantly walking toward the door. The shelter dweller stumbled into the house like a large snowdrift. His eyelashes and sparse beard were coated with frost, and the chapped, dark skin on his face was flushed. Without removing his shoes, the Shorian sat down wearily right by the threshold. The snow that had fallen from him quickly began to melt, and the floor became covered in small puddles. Oh, the misery of life. I thought I'd make it before the storm, but it caught me on the climb. Zheka took off his thick mittens and began rubbing his frozen hands. Only then did he look at Albert Borisovich, narrow his already narrow eyes, and exclaim in surprise, "Oh, Igor! Great! And where's Venya?" The scientist was taken aback for a second upon hearing the stranger's name, but then remembered that he had introduced himself that way for covert purposes during their first meeting in the forest. "Do you know Venya?" Kaimovich answered a question with a question. "Of course. I haven't seen him for a long time, though." "He's gone. Venya died." He was an old friend of mine, the professor explained dryly, taking a step back. His hand clutched the rifle tensely. One sharp movement, one look that I don't like, and I'll turn his face into mincemeat, Albert Borisovich decided to himself. The guest stared ahead with a stunned expression. The news of the inspector's death had clearly disconcerted him. Well, that's how it is. He seemed like a healthy guy. How did he die? Like the others, an epidemic. It reached here too. Venya got infected. We met him in the forest and had to shoot him. There's a cross in the field there, his grave. Zheka withdrew into himself and fell silent. Finally, he licked his chapped lips, wiped the thawed snot from under his nose and stood up. The remnants of snow rolled down his old, worn, gray-green ski jacket. Kyamovich, afraid to blink, watched the stranger's every move. "Can I warm up?" The shelter owner looked sadly at the new owner of the house. The scientist was not very keen on having tea with a man whom he had recently planned to shoot for no reason, but he nevertheless invited his guest to the table. "How did you end up here?" "It's a long way to your house," Albert Borisovich said, placing a mug of hot taiga tea in front of the shore. "I wanted to buy a gun from Venya. I found one at the Podnebezny. That's the name of the shelter, abandoned now, of course. I lived there for 3 days and no one came. So I took the gun and 20 rounds of ammunition with it. But they ran out, and the winter is long. I remembered the inspectors had guns, and I wanted to haggle." Zheka stared questioningly at the professor. "Well, yes, there was a gun," Kyamovich reluctantly agreed, and stood up to pour the mushrooms into the pan. "Igor, sell it. Name your price. When you were riding through the forest on horseback, you carried a lot of trees. And now you have even more and I have none." "Well, don't bother. You're not that dangerous without a weapon." Albert Borisovich frantically weighed the pros and cons of the possible deal. The Shorian seemed like a simple, good-natured fellow, but the professor was terrified of trusting anyone. He saw every stranger as a cunning enemy. On the other hand, Kyamovich understood that a desperate man was dangerous, even with a fork in his hand. If he wanted, the shelter owner could ambush him or Tanya even in the restroom in the evening. They didn't have a dog, so there was no one to warn them of the approach of a stranger. The guest sat with one leg tucked under him, blissfully sipping hot tea. The scientist's gaze slid to the rifle, which remained hanging in the hallway. "Just take a few steps, grab a rifle, and shoot him on the spot. He won't suspect a thing. He won't even have time to flinch. I'll explain everything to Tanya later. Tell her he attacked me with a knife and I had to defend myself. Come on, this is how it has to be." Albert Borisovich swallowed nervously and with shaking hands closed the lid on the pot. "I'll show you all the places here, the best places to fish and hunt. I know all the plants here, which ones are good for diarrhea and which ones can relieve a fever. I'll teach you how to read tracks in the ground and snow, and how to set clever snares that no animal would guess," Zheka insisted. Yes, right now." Kyamovich ignored the shore's words and headed for the hallway. He took the rifle from the wall and hesitated for a second. "I don't want to make a bloodbath at home." "Oh well, we'll clean it up." The professor's determined demeanor was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Tanya was descending from the second floor. "Everything's okay? We have guests, right?" "Huh? Well, you know, I told you to stay up there. The mentor muttered through his teeth, displeased.
You were talking. I thought I could too.
The girl was already standing on the floor, looking at the professor in confusion. "Oh, hi!" Jeka greeted happily and waved his hand amiably from the kitchen. "Hello," the little girl answered modestly, looking at the guest with curiosity. Albert Borisovich wiped the nervous sweat from his brow and hung up his rifle. Meanwhile, the shelter attendant continued his chatter, clearly missing human contact. "It's great here. Wind generator, electricity. No TV." "Nope, just books," Tanya sighed, sitting down at the large cedar table. "I have a plasma TV in my shelter and 10 terabytes of movies on my hard drives. Admittedly, I've already watched everything 3 times. There's nothing for me to do alone. Back in the day, tourists used to stay at my shelter, both winter and summer. People came from all over Kuzbas, Khakassia, Novosibirsk, even Muscovites would drop by." "You have a wind turbine too?" Kaimovich asked in surprise. "No, a regular generator, fuel-powered." The professor slowly stirred sugar in his mug of tea. "And you burn fuel to watch a movie? What else can I do with it? At least it's some kind of entertainment. Otherwise, I'd go crazy." "I haven't watched a movie for ages," the girl said enviously. "Come visit any time," the Shorin happily invited. Tanya glanced timidly at Albert Borisovich, but he was staring out the window. The snow continued to fall, and the gusty wind would subside, then howl with renewed vigor. "We have a long way to go. We can't get there on horseback. The snowmobile is broken, and we don't want to spend the night in a snowdrift." "I can't help with the snowmobile. I'm no expert with the equipment," Jeka admitted. There was a base at Luzhba, just across the river from the train station. There were a lot of snowmobiles there, taking tourists to the shelters. Kaimovich became wary. "And what's it like at this base? Are there people?" "It's empty. Half of it burned down. The rest is abandoned. The emergency services post burned down too. The nearby houses and shelters are all deserted. There used to be crowds there, but now there's not a soul around." Albert Borisovich shook his head sympathetically, although this news made him very happy. "Have you seen anyone else besides us? Maybe someone else has appeared in the mountains." "No." Silence. "It's just us here." The scientist looked at Tanya, then at his guest, and finally made a difficult decision. A couple of minutes later, he placed one of Venya's guns on the table and set down several boxes of ammunition. Zhenya's eyes lit up with happiness. "I'm not much of a haggler. What's your offer for this?" Kaimovich stood by the window, clutching his rifle as a precaution. When the men finished their tea, they shook hands. The deal was done. Chapter 4. Politics. Ivan woke up and kissed Masha on the cheek, but she continued to snore peacefully. The cosmonaut lay on the bed for a couple of minutes, staring at the ceiling. Then pulled on a pair of tights and a t-shirt and went into the kitchen. Vorobyov was the first to wake up. The rest of the house was still asleep. The boy wanted coffee, so he took a brass chesva out of the cabinet. The friends had a small stash of ground coffee left over from their Volga voyage on the Beluga. Ivan turned on the gas stove and poured some water. What a thrill it was to once again experience all the pleasures of civilization. Electricity, gas, running water, hot showers, and sewerage. Barefoot footsteps were heard on the stairs. Katya shook her shock of red hair and pulled it back into a ponytail. "Hey, I was wondering who's already bustling around in the kitchen. decided to make everyone breakfast. Good morning. I suggest we reheat last night's dinner. What's the point of cooking it if we're leaving today? There should be just enough for everyone. In the meantime, I want to make some coffee.
Will you? Of course, I'll just brush my teeth now. Lysitsina went to the bathroom and Vorobyov couldn't help but watch her. Slender legs, short, tight shorts, firm breasts, the contours of which were easily discernible under a thin white t-shirt. Ivan once again felt a slight twinge of envy for his friend. This wasn't the first time the cosmonaut had caught himself thinking this while looking at Katya, which made him feel a little awkward in front of Masha. She was also a beauty, but the red-haired student exuded a special energy. At such moments, Vorobyov felt like electricity was flickering under his skin. He tried to suppress his excitement and busied himself with his coffee. Ivan remembered Masha once telling Andrei that she liked her, and he'd made advances toward her while they were working in the lab. This amused the cosmonaut. The house was gradually waking up. Andreyuka followed Katya downstairs, followed by Max, and Lena and Masha were the last to trudge into the kitchen. Everyone was a little nervous. Today, for the first time in a while, their group would have to split up. "Katya, have you packed your things?" Kuznetsov muttered, sleepily stirring sugar into his black coffee. "I'll pack it now. We have very few things." Masha put a frying pan on to heat up with yesterday's Navy-style noodles, to which, instead of minced meat, they generously added some stewed beef. If you stumble upon a clothing store in Gelendzhik, scoop up everything in sight. We'll figure out the sizes from there. "Yeah, you think the locals haven't cleaned it up yet?" My husband grimaced skeptically. "In our experience, every city has at least a handful of people who survive, so they grab all the resources. I think there's a lot more stuff gathering dust in the city than a bunch of survivors could possibly need in the coming years," Katya objected. "And we're already walking around like homeless people in tattered rags." "We are homeless," Max agreed, unpacking a pack of cookies. "We don't have a permanent place to live. And this house is just a temporary den." Lena thought about her brother's words. "I like it here. I'm talking about the village. It's small, cozy, far from the big cities. There's electricity, gas, and water. I could stay here longer." "Ready to trade the farm for the sea?" Owl chuckled. Kuznetsov looked at the girl in surprise. "Well, they're sitting in the wilderness and the zombies still show up. And in such a huge crowd, it's a shame. Cans are migratory. We have to take that into account. When the food runs out in the cities, they move on. And they eat everyone they meet. I still suggest we proceed with our plan once we've finished our business here." Andrei's words drew approval from Max and Katya. Lena had already expressed her opinion, but the Vorobyevs remained silent. The cosmonaut gazed thoughtfully at the coffee grounds at the bottom of his mug, as if trying to divine the future. The key phrase is "finish things." And who knows how long that could drag on. If everything goes well, our trip to Gelendzhik will take 2 or 3 days. And how long you'll be stuck in your lab is anyone's guess. Well, I'm not going to sign up for eternal bondage there either. "Andrei, you can't do this. We now have a chance to create a vaccine," Masha sternly admonished her colleague. Kuznetsov grumbled sullenly in response. "They've got a chance, but we have immunity. It's a question of who needs us more." This answer angered the girl even more. What's wrong with you? This is about the survival of humanity as a species. And this vaccine may be our only chance. And here you're comparing who needs whom more.
Okay, calm down. I didn't express myself well, you're right. Okay, let's move on. Sorry. Andre quickly retreated so as not to have to listen to any moralizing. So, we'll finish eating, pack up, and hit the road. We agreed to meet the president in an hour. It wouldn't be nice to be late for a meeting with the top official. A slight smile flitted across Ivan's lips. Yeah, the first battered, unshaven face. And what's the official name of his cottage here? The Kremlin? Max chimed in. Despite the jitters before the big day, their mood began to improve as the conversation progressed. They were almost at the sea, after all. The goal, which from Novosibirsk had seemed elusive and difficult, was almost achieved. But now new tasks and concerns had arisen. Then again, only the dead don't have worries. Why are you trolling Kornilov? He seems like a normal guy to me, no quirks, even modest. He doesn't bang his shoe on the table, doesn't demand that everyone obey him. And he's a reasonable guy, not a rich kid, it seems. Kuznetsov defended the president. Well, by the way, yes, I was surprised too. Katya agreed with the guy. I didn't recognize him at all. I thought he was some bearded farmer, and then, lo and behold, the president. Max finished his mug in one gulp, chewing his noodles with gusto. So, this is the new capital? Since the president now lives here. I think every community has its own president these days. Or, more accurately, a dictator. Kornilov's only advantage is access to an underground shelter that few people know about. Let's take a look at their lab. Maybe we'll find something useful. Andre said thoughtfully, examining a nickel-silver fork. Everyone was leaving the village for a while. Ivan and Max were planning to reach Gelendzhik by sea, and Gor and Lyoka volunteered to help them. Masha and Andre were heading to an underground government bunker to work on an antivirus, and Lena and Katya were going with them, as they didn't want to be left alone in Dalny. Before reaching this decision, everyone debated for a long time. At first, Masha suggested they all go together to find her husband's parents, but Lev Nikolaevich insisted that they begin developing a vaccine immediately. Your knowledge is the key to the survival of the human species. I beg you, don't risk yourselves. We can all help Ivan find his parents. I'm ready to go with him myself, but you and Andre must focus on the antiviral. Only you can create a vaccine, which means you should be completely safe. Ultimately, Andre and Masha reluctantly agreed with the president's arguments. They decided to assemble a small mobile unit of young, strong men to search for Vorobyov's parents. So Lev Nikolaevich and Fyodor were left to guard the village. Gorik said he'd help find a boat in Dagomis and accompany his new acquaintances on the journey. Lyoka offered his services as a fighting force, and no one objected. The four of them were to travel to the former resort town, but they still had to figure out how to get there. But first, they needed to replenish the arsenal of the Dalny defenders, which had been completely depleted after the infected invasion. Lev Nikolaevich promised to quickly resolve this issue. He remembered that there were still plenty of weapons stored in the bunker. In the morning, 2 vehicles set out from the village toward the government shelter. Left unattended, the road quickly fell into disrepair, with branches and debris piled high in some places. In one section near a sheer cliff, the asphalt had to be cleared of a rockfall. We reached the shelter a little later than planned, but otherwise, without any serious problems. Kornilov drove up to the main gate, got out of the car, and pressed the alarm. They had to wait about 10 minutes before they were allowed through the security perimeter. There was no particular reason to worry,
but the president felt a strange sense of unease. The gate opened slightly. The cars entered the compound and parked near a small building. Wow! Is this an observatory? A real one? Max looked at the large gray dome with greedy curiosity. Yes, it was operational, automated, and underneath it is our bunker. The president gestured toward the security camera. Andre looked around with mild suspicion. The scientist expected to hear a huge gate grinding open somewhere in the ground, revealing an underground tunnel, like in science fiction movies. So, this is where the cream of society was supposed to hide if trouble started? Kuznetsov asked with a hint of cynicism. Same here. This is one of the perimeter system centers. There are many of them all over Russia. Ours is a large country, so if, for example, a disaster were to happen, a nuclear war, and the president is on a working visit to the Far East, according to protocol for preserving the safety of top officials, he won't be returning to Moscow. He'll be taken to a shelter near Vladivostok, Khabarovsk, or Magadan, basically wherever's closest. That's where they'll get him, if they can. So, is there a bunker like this near every big city? The scientist continued his questioning. Lev Nikolaevich thought for a second, recalling the map of rescue centers. No, not with everyone, but with many. Building such a facility is not cheap. They started actively building them after the 1960s, and in the early 2000s they started rebuilding old ones and building new ones. Okay, there's not much to see from the outside. Let's go inside. Kornilov approached a long, one-story building with several gates, resembling a large garage for heavy equipment. The president entered the code on the combination lock and the door opened. Bright lights immediately lit up inside, and Lev Nikolaevich strode confidently down the corridor. We're going this way. Don't fall behind. Once everyone was in the small, empty room, Kornilov locked the door, ran his hand along the wall, and activated the touchscreen. We are here. The floor rumbled beneath their feet and began to slowly move downward. Max lifted his head and watched the ceiling recede. Is this an elevator? Yes. This is one of the entrances to the shelter. The front entrance, so to speak. Last time we went through the back. Now we'll be in the sterilization zone. Don't be alarmed. The procedure isn't very pleasant, but it's inevitable. Andre moved closer to Ivan and quietly said in his ear, What do you mean sterilization? Are they going to cut off your balls? Spit, you'll croak, the cosmonaut hissed at his friend. Only after a multi-level disinfection were they allowed into the bunker itself. The friends expected to see something fantastic, but the reality turned out to be quite mundane. It looks a bit like our laboratory. Andre yawned with slight disappointment. Masha agreed and added reservedly, Yes, there are some similarities. The main thing is how it's equipped. I want to take a quick look at the equipment. Meanwhile, the president was warmly greeting old acquaintances. Almost half the bunker quickly surrounded them. The shelter hummed like a disturbed beehive. But it hummed cheerfully and warmly. Everyone was eager to hear news from the surface and vied with each other in asking questions. Suddenly, a high, slightly squeaky but commanding voice was heard in the crowd, and the others fell silent. Lev Nikolaevich, how glad we are to see you. Wow, where did you get this bad? Come on, I'll treat your wounds. Elena Vasilyevna Malishkina emerged from behind us,
and smiled cloyingly at Kornilov.
The president was surprised to hear a new tone in his former subordinate's voice. Previously, she had seemed more mousy, but during his absence, she had transformed. Kornilov nodded in greeting. "Thank you, it's already healing." The village was attacked by an entire army of cannibals, and we had to fight. "We're out of ammo. We need to replenish the arsenal." Malishkina pursed her lips in displeasure. "Lev Nikolaevich, let's go and discuss these strategic points." "What a cunning toad," thought Kornilov. "It looks like she's seized power here, and power changes people, often not for the better." "No, you and I won't be whispering behind closed doors." Ignoring the former Deputy Minister of Health's proposal, the president turned to Kalmykov. "And how is Zakhar Evgenievich? Better?" "His condition is stable. He is gradually coming to his senses. I'll visit him once we finish things." The shelter's chief engineer was still recovering from a severe stroke and was barely participating in community life. Kornilov glanced at his companions. "I didn't introduce you to my new friends." Lev Nikolaevich introduced everyone by name, naming Andrei and Masha last. Malishkina stared at the strangers with her small, cunning eyes. Apparently, a lot of weapons are needed, since such a large delegation has arrived. Elena Vassilyevna was surrounded by several representatives of the old government and lower-ranking officials. With each passing minute, the president increasingly realized that for many, he was already a stranger here. They have a new leader, a new small elite, and I really don't want to give up my power to them. Lev Nikolaevich felt how he had become unaccustomed to this slippery politics, but the matter demanded it. Weapons, medicine, and even seeds from the bio-storage facility. The best varieties of potatoes, wheat, sunflowers, corn. I have a whole list from our agronomist. Malishkina pouted, not expecting such impudence. Now she absolutely had to demonstrate her authority. Lev Nikolaevich no longer had the support he had in the old days. His main supporters had been killed during the rebellion, and after Chernov fled, Elena Vassilyevna, with the agility of a spider, began weaving a web of intrigue to cling to power. And she succeeded. She couldn't allow the ex-president to come whenever he wanted and take whatever he wanted. Lev Nikolaevich, you know perfectly well that our resources are limited. Moreover, they belong not only to you, but to our entire community. If you want to take something, please offer something in exchange. I think I speak for the majority, Malishkina said, looking around. The people remained silent, uncertain whose side to take. Kornilov smiled to himself. Bravo, Elena Vassilyevna. You should have worked in the Ministry of Trade, not in healthcare. You think I have nothing to offer in return, so you decided to haggle? You're wrong. I have more aces up my sleeve than you could ever dream of. The din grew louder. People whispered and discussed among themselves in hushed tones. Lev Nikolaevich raised his hands above his head, calling for everyone to be silent, and they obeyed immediately. Friends, I completely agree with Ms. Malishkina. As your new leader, she is committed to preserving the community's resources. This is very wise and far-sighted. The phrase, new leader, held a hint of irony, causing a shadow of irritation to cross Elena Vassilyevna's face. Kornilov immediately continued. For my part, I'm also thinking about the future of our society. Therefore, we are laying the foundation for your life outside these walls. When the epidemic ends and you rise to the surface, you will already have a new home. A safe place. A cozy village, surrounded by cultivated fields and meadows. You won't be wandering through the forests, trying to adapt to a new reality. People hung on the president's every word, craving faith in a happy future like air. And Lev Nikolaevich skillfully nurtured this faith. But to do that, we need to defend and preserve this place now. So we've come to ask for your help. You're safe, but we risk our lives every day fighting off bandits and zombies. We don't have warehouses stocked with supplies. We have to forage for food. And the seeds you give us today will become your bread tomorrow. Tomorrow is a flexible concept. No one knows how long the epidemic will last. Malishkina crossed her arms over her chest and turned away. And that's the main purpose of our visit. Luckily, we were able to meet these guys, the president said, putting his arm around the scientist's shoulders. They've already saved our lives recently, and I'm sure they'll save many more in the future. Andrei and Maria will remain in the shelter to work on developing a vaccine. They're virologists from Novosibirsk. They worked in one of the best laboratories in the country. And I think only they can create an antivirus. So provide them with everything they need. I'm sure everyone understands the importance of their mission. Elena Vasilyevna opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. Sounds of jubilation erupted from the vaults of the bunker. Some clapped, others shouted enthusiastically, everyone trying to touch the scientists. An hour later, Lev Nikolaevich, Ivan, Max, and Gorik returned to the surface with everything they needed. The president left the shelter with trepidation. Malishkina's intrigues greatly alarmed him. But at least she hadn't arranged a mass execution of those undesirable to the new regime. They'd gotten everything they wanted for now. But who knows what kind of reception they'll get next time. Much of that will depend on Andrei and Masha. Chapter 5. Dagomis Boris sat in the attic, watching with his one remaining eye the two cars that had just left the village. It was his first shift at the chip after the zombie battle. Oksana and Marina were still insisting on bed rest. But Robocop was tired of feeling like dead weight. What kind of a Rafnitsa? Should I be at home, reading books, or at my post? So what's the use? The border guard said, lisping every other word, demanding to be included in the duty roster. Fyodor had to give in to his friend. Boris pulled painkillers from his pocket and washed them down with water from a bottle. His hands were shaking slightly, and he spilled a few drops on his t-shirt. Today he had had the same nightmare again, one that had often plagued him in recent months. A border guard swimming deep underwater, trying to surface. He saw rays of sunlight shining overhead, but suddenly the water turned red, and a salty, metallic taste appeared in his mouth. There it was again, the taste of blood, unmistakable. Robocop stroked hard, but the surface approached very slowly. His chest tightened unbearably. His lungs were running out of air. He clenched his teeth, tried a few more attempts. But at that moment, something abruptly yanked his leg. Boris tilted his head and saw hundreds of hands reaching for him from the bottom, grabbing him, scratching him with their claws, and dragging him into the depths. A desperate cry, and the last bubbles of oxygen escaped his mouth. He ran out of air, and water rushed into his lungs. The scream woke him up in bed every time, breathing heavily and taking a long time to come to his senses. The nightmare always occurred in the early morning, so it was very vivid in his memory. As zombies descended on him from all sides in the field near the village, the border guard found himself back in that terrible dream. His eyes filled with blood, A familiar metallic taste filled his mouth, and a multitude of hands and teeth were tearing him apart. He couldn't escape the mass of stinking, growling, heavy bodies. The last thing Boris remembered was a terrible pain in his eye, after which he lost consciousness. A couple dozen lacerations, 3 knocked-out front teeth, and a gouged-out eye. Not such a high price to pay for returning from the dead, RoboCop calculated. However, the lisp that had developed was deeply irritating. Now the border guard was barely understood by those around him, and before speaking, he had to mentally rehearse his sentences or repeat them several times. Boris followed the cars with his gaze, and before they disappeared behind the trees, he managed to cross the travelers for a good road. Gorik sat in the front seat, driving a large Toyota Galaxy hybrid pickup truck. To his right, Ivan rode with a Kalashnikov barrel poking out the open window. Behind the boys, in the open back of the truck, stood a live ram, its head and legs bound. Shoes and groceries were strewn in the back seat of the truck. Vorobyov hid a bag of jewelry they'd taken from the corpses of the infected in the inside pocket of his tracksuit. They'd taken all this treasure as payment if they could find a boat with a captain. But Ivan wasn't counting on it, even though he knew it wouldn't be easy to reach Gelendzhik by sea. It's one thing to navigate a sophisticated yacht, brimming with electronics, on a river. Another to navigate a fishing boat, unfamiliar with the fairway and the intricacies of maritime navigation. The only other option was to make their way along the coast by land. But everyone agreed that the sea route was preferable. But more than himself, the cosmonaut was worried about Masha, who found herself surrounded by strangers in an underground bunker. Of course, Andrei, Katya, and Lena were with her. But for some reason, this did little to calm him. Vorobyov had quietly begun to dislike Lev Nikolaevich. After all, he had interfered with their plans for Gelendzhik. The president convinced the scientists to begin work on a vaccine immediately. This forced them to split up, as the cosmonaut also didn't want to delay the search for his parents. A sign indicating a secondary road junction appeared ahead. The cosmonaut nodded towards the turnoff. "And where is this?" "There used to be a small village there, but it's empty now. We already checked," Gorik replied melancholically, without turning his head. Ivan peered intently between the trees, which sometimes crowded tightly around the road, sometimes retreated from it. "Are there many like that here? When we were making our way through the mountains, we didn't see any signs of life. Yours was the first settlement in 2 weeks." Dalny is, you might say, the northernmost settlement in this area, and the newest, probably. The further south you go, closer to the sea, the more settlements will appear. I know this area well. The main thing for us is to turn right before Volkovka. There's a large village there, and we don't want to drive through it. We'll make a detour and go around Dagomis. There's no point in going into the town itself. How many people used to live in Dagomis? About 20,000 locals, and during the peak season, the city swells 3 times with tourists. The epidemic broke out at the beginning of summer. I think not many vacationers arrived yet, Ivan suggested. Yes, the veterinarian agreed. High season hasn't even started yet, but the beaches are already packed. Don't expect an easy stroll through town. There are plenty of zombies there. It's not a fact that they are still sitting in the city. 4 crows hopped on the road ahead, hastily pecking at some carrion. The birds spotted the approaching pickup truck and took off just in front of the bumper. The boys didn't notice what was lying on the asphalt. Gorik missed the rotting piece of meat between the tires. "And what did you do here before?" Vorobyov realized he barely knew the man he was going with on this dangerous expedition. All he knew about Gorik was that he lived in Dagomis, making him ideal for the role of guide. A veterinarian. Cattle, lambs, pigs. Well, I could also treat cats and dogs if needed. Marina often came to me. Well, I get it. Marina worked at shelters for homeless animals. That's how we met. That's why I ended up in Dalny when I was getting out of the city. And the family? Gore scratched his unshaven cheek, his voice trembling slightly. There is no one left. Everyone is infected. The cosmonaut felt his nose getting stuffy, took a deep breath, felt a thick lump in his mouth, and spat loudly out the open window. A veterinarian. A useful profession, and in these times, worth its weight in gold. I understand you and Fyodor are planning to set up a whole state farm here. Well, not a state farm, but we will build a large one. How else are we supposed to survive? Ivan didn't respond. A silhouette flashed between the trees and the cosmonaut instantly braced his shoulder against the butt of his rifle. Gorik also noticed the danger and stomped on the gas pedal. The heavy pickup accelerated surprisingly quickly, and Vorobyov even sank back into his seat. Several infected ran out of the forest and tried to block the second car's path. Sova opened fire, and a tall man with a dirty black beard immediately fell to the side, the bullet piercing his heart and exiting between his shoulder blades. Lyoka swerved left to avoid the second zombie, but it charged in front of him. There was a dull thud and the zombie's body was thrown upward, slamming into the windshield and flying over the roof. A large web of cracked glass immediately formed on the windshield. What a bastard, the young Cossack cursed. I can't see a damn thing now. The rest of the zombies fell behind, but Lyoka had to continue driving, half leaning out the window to see the road. Ivan made sure that his friends had passed the dangerous place and turned to Gore. It was a mistake for him to start shooting. We would have gotten through, but now we're making a lot of noise. The vet shrugged. What will be, will be. Do you mind if I turn on some music quietly? Well, whatever, the cosmonaut replied without enthusiasm. He tapped his fingers on the panel, examining the display with interest. The car is brand new. With autopilot, I guess? Yeah, but I cut him off right away. He was being really slow here. Automotive experts' predictions that by 2030, half of humanity would be driving self-driving cars haven't come to fruition. At least in Russia, the process has been much slower than in Europe, the US, or Japan. But things didn't stand still. Artificial intelligence was increasingly penetrating all spheres of human life. The first to lose their jobs due to self-driving cars were heavy equipment drivers in industrial quarries and construction. Then, artificial intelligence replaced most train drivers. Autopilot was introduced into public transportation, and robotaxis emerged. Another year or two and robots will start wiping our snot and asses, Ivan recalled his father's grumbling. They won't start, Dad. They'll never start now. Well, not for a couple of thousand years for sure. Mom, Dad, where are you? I'll get there, I promise, I'll get there. Okay, the turnoff now will be inconspicuous. The old road will run through the forest between the mountains. Only the locals used it here. No autopilot would have driven on it, Gore explained, turning off the highway. Vorobyov opened the bottle and took a sip of cold green tea. Do you know any fishermen in Dagomis? Or anyone who's taken tourists on sea trips? Who had a boat? No, I haven't encountered any of those guys. But I know where there's a small dock, a remote spot, and I hope we can park nearby. We'll take it from there depending on the situation. Soon the road became gravel. Tires crunched over the stones, raising a light dusting, and the cars slowed. The cosmonaut reached out and took 2 apples from the bag on the back seat. "Will you?" "No thanks. I'll come and chew it," the veterinarian declined.
Listen, what does Dagomas mean? What language is it from? Gorik slowed down and the pickup truck drove smoothly over a small pothole. I read about it once. Back in school. In Kuban studies class, I think they told us about it. Anyway, it's from Circassian, or Adigi. I don't remember exactly. But something like a dark place, or a place where the sun doesn't shine well, something like that. Got it. I'll keep that in mind. I used to go to the sea here a lot as a kid, but I've never been to Dagomas. You would have liked it. It was beautiful here. Although why was it? The beauty hasn't gone anywhere, only the people. The closer they got to the coast, the more anxious Ivan became. The hope of finding one of his parents still lingered within him. Vorobyov tossed the apple core out the window and began on the second apple. The wind picked up, its gusts creating an uneasy rustle in the treetops. Suddenly, one of the massive branches broke and fell across the road. "I don't really like this sign," Gorik grumbled, slowing down. Ivan waited until the second car stopped and opened the door. "Cover me. I'll handle it." Chapter 6. A Useful Man. Boris looked at his watch. He was supposed to have been relieved 15 minutes ago, but Soroka was running late. He fumbled for his radio and was about to ask Fyodor if anything had happened to his neighbor, but decided to wait a bit longer. The shift had passed quietly. Other than the guy's departure, nothing had happened in Dalny all day. Finally, about 10 minutes later, he heard hurried footsteps near the house. "Borya, I'm coming, don't be angry," Soroka's voice sounded before her appearance. "No, I'm not angry, but I can't be late for my shift," Robocop answered sullenly. "I was cleaning a flock of chickens and got busy. So far, this and that." The border guard wasn't particularly fond of this chatty woman, who in the past had done nothing but spread gossip throughout the village. But Boris understood that there were no other people, so he had to command even these fighters. "Here's the radio. Fedya's worth $10. Keep your eyes peeled. The Shorroks have sharp eyes, right? They say they can spot lice a mile away. Why are you teasing me? They're talking in the Duma, but they're working here. Go away already," the woman rattled off with feigned anger, her characteristic shock and heck sounds. Boris was already heading for the stairs when he suddenly peered out the window with his one eye and grabbed his gun. A lone man with a large backpack was slowly walking along the road to the village. He trudged wearily in his hiking boots and leaned on a sturdy walking stick. The stranger was dressed in long khaki shorts and a light gray hoodie. A typical tourist at first glance, except there were no tourists left. A sentry was already waiting for the tramp at the fence gate. Robocop peered at the stranger over the barbed wire. The traveler raised his hands, one palm open, the other clutching his staff club. "Hello. Can I find a place to stay here? I'm not a beggar, I have food with me. I just need a roof over my head. I don't want to sleep in the forest." "We can find a roof, but who are you? Where are you going and where are you from?" The border guard studied the stranger warily but curiously. Footsteps were heard behind Boris. It was the small reinforcements, Fyodor and Lev Nikolaevich, hurrying toward him. "My name is Valentin, Alexeyevich by my father's name. I'm coming from Tuapse, and where? To be honest, wherever my eyes lead me. I'm looking for a safe and quiet place."
"Are you alone?" the president asked, feeling a vague trust in the wanderer. After all, he himself had recently been searching for a similar place. "Yes, alone. I had company, but we didn't part on the best of terms. If you want, I can tell you more later." Valentin adjusted the dirty blue bandana on his sweaty forehead. His voice sounded young, but his thick black beard made it difficult to tell his age. The men exchanged glances. The tramp had behaved appropriately, hadn't spied, hadn't been cunning, had come out to them with his hands up. They could tell him to go to hell, but what the consequences would be was a big question. "Well, let's go. We're happy to see normal people. We'll find somewhere to spend the night." The Cossack nodded, inviting the guest into the village. A quarter of an hour later, Valentin was sitting at the communal table in Fyodor's kitchen. Marina and Ksyusha were looking with interest at the new face in their small community. Oksana poured the men a shot of moonshine. Alcohol loosened tongues as well as any interrogator. "So, who was that company you parted with?" Lev Nikolaevich reminded them of the unfinished topic of conversation. The tramp drank half a glass of kvass with pleasure, wincing at the slight sourness. "It happened about 2 weeks ago. I met a married couple in the forest, the man about 50, his wife about 40. They lived in some leaky hut they'd built hastily. They said they were from Lazarevskoye. Roma, the man, had a wound on his leg that had become infected. He couldn't walk. He was ready to die. I remembered the Hippocratic principle and decided to stay with them and started treating him." "Are you a doctor?" Oksana asked happily. "Better. I'm a dentist. I always kept a large first aid kit at home, a survivalist's medical kit, so to speak. When I realized there was no help coming and it was time to get out of town, I packed my backpack and hit the road." "Are you alone, without a family?" the Cossack asked, twirling his mustache. Valentin thought for a second, his eyes filled with longing, and the guest tossed back a full glass. "There was a family, a wife and 2 daughters. The eldest got infected before we even realized what we were dealing with. I went to work, and when I returned, my wife met me with bloody hands. Anechka went berserk and attacked her sister. Ira rushed to separate them, and her daughter nearly mauled her to death. I think you understand how it all ended. For some reason, this infection didn't touch me. I don't know why I was so lucky. Or maybe, on the contrary, it's a punishment, not luck, for us to live in such a world. Huh? What do you think? Living life is not a walk in the park. If God has decided it's too early for us to die, then there's no point in rushing it, Fyodor drawled. I didn't believe in God before, and now I don't believe in God at all, the dentist answered melancholically. Well, that's everyone's business. I thought so too, but... Marina didn't finish her thought and fell silent. There was a pause, and the guest, in order to change the subject, continued his story. So, about those comrades in the hut. Anyway, I treated the wounded man for about 10 days, and he used a ton of antibiotics. Eventually the wound healed, and he was able to walk and even run. We set off together, and a couple of days later we found a hunting lodge in the woods and decided to hole up there for a while. Valia spoke interestingly and expressively. Everyone silently, without interrupting, caught his every word. Inga, the wife of our wounded man, was supposed to be on duty that night.
I was lying there, thinking about the past, about my family, about my old dreams and plans. But sleep just wouldn't come. Inga was sitting by the window, very quietly. Suddenly she got up and tiptoed toward my sleeping bag. I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep, and even snored louder, the guest said, looking around the table with an intriguing gaze. She stood over me for about 30 seconds, and with my eyes closed I could feel her staring at me in silence. Thoughts started creeping into my head, like, what if she wants to cheat on her husband with me while he's sleeping? Maybe she really liked me that much? She looked pretty good, by the way. She'd taken care of herself in her prime. Fyodor let out a light chuckle. He shifted impatiently in his chair, waiting to see how the story would end. So, how was it? Did she cheat? Lev Nikolaevich asked, his question instantly causing a wave of laughter in the kitchen. No, the dentist replied seriously. I heard the floor creak. Inga took a couple of steps away from my sleeping bag. I cracked one eye open. It was a moonlit, cloudless night. The room was lit up, so silhouettes were clearly visible. I heard Inga and her husband whispering, and a second ago he was snoring like a drunk tractor. He was pretending then. Well, I thought. The evening, or rather the night, is no longer languid. A minute later I saw two shadows approaching me, Roma with an axe sneaking up on me, and the bastard had a knife flashing in her hands. Then I jumped up and yelled at the top of my lungs, "Stop! I'll shoot those bastards!" RoboCop cracked his fingers in anticipation of the outcome. Photo of the Shvolochi. Well, I yelled at them a little differently, but there's a child here. I won't put it past you. I think everyone got the gist. Valya winked at Ksyusha and continued. Basically, they were dumbfounded, paralyzed. As it turned out later, Roma was right there. Not to mention at the table, pissing himself with fear. He didn't want to kill me. Inga, the bitch, talked him into it. Why? Oksana interrupted the storyteller, adding some salted mushrooms to the cup. The guest stood up, went to his backpack and pulled out an old, worn Makarov pistol. That was their object of desire. Well, and the rest of my belongings too. They wanted to whack me with a hatchet, those damned Raskolniks, and take this junk for themselves. That's how much they thanked me, but they didn't dare do it right away. Inga spent several days cultivating my husband for this. And how did it end? Did they get killed? The president tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table, resting his fist on his cheek. No, I sent them away. I didn't want to get my hands dirty. But I said that if I spotted them, day or night, anywhere, I'd open fire without warning. The funny thing is, I only had 2 rounds left in my clip, but that would have been just enough for those bastards. Boris coughed into his fist and adjusted his eye patch. He was the only one not drinking at the table. The painkiller was wearing off, and RoboCop reached into his pocket for more pills. Shraya. I would kill. Me too, Ksyusha suddenly interrupted the adult conversation. So you never saw them again? Marina asked, biting her lip. No, fortunately. I hope they didn't hurt anyone. I didn't sleep a wink that night, afraid they'd ambush me while I was sleeping. The door to the little house was really flimsy. I lived there for 3 more days and then moved on. Whose gun is it? Fyodor asked as the dentist put the weapon back in his backpack pocket. Oh, that's another story, Valentin answered animatedly, returning to the table. Meanwhile, the border guard came out onto the porch and raised the radio to his mouth. Reception.
Magpie, what's the situation? Hello, everything's fine, there's no one else. Who's that man over there? What's he saying? Curiosity oozed over the radio. Boris didn't wait for the word reception. The neighbor forgot this rule again. We're chatting, nothing interesting yet. Over. Is he staying with us? Has he met any other people? What's going on around here? The woman chattered, peppering RoboCop with questions. In short, keep your eyes peeled. If you see anything suspicious, report it to me immediately. For any reason. Over. Boris ended the communication session, although Soroka wanted to chat some more. The border guard felt a vague distrust of this dentist and decided to walk to the other end of the village. He barely made it past the barricade of cars and descended to the river. All was calm. RoboCop stood there for a couple of minutes and then headed back to Fyodor's house. Meanwhile, Valentin continued to spin tales and anecdotes from his life. When Boris returned to the table, the dentist was just telling the story of how he acquired a gun. I was still hiding at home then, unable to bring myself to leave. We lived on the second floor of a 6-story building. I set up an observation post on the balcony. There was still gunfire in the city back then, but then it became less and less frequent. The less gunfire there was, the more cannibals appeared on the streets. And then, finally, it arrived. What I called the point of no return. The resistance had ceased, the zombies had taken over the city. I still had some food supplies, and luckily the running water was working. But I decided it was time to leave. I hadn't really come up with a plan. The main thing was to get as far away from the city as possible. I was just scared to go alone and without a weapon. That's logical, Fyodor remarked, exchanging glances with the president. But then I see a cop in the yard. Well, he was infected, of course. There weren't any healthy ones left by then. And if there were any left, they weren't walking around in broad daylight. I took a closer look, and the cop had a gun in his holster. Well, I thought, this is my chance. I carefully lured the cannibal cop to the window and dropped the nightstand on him. It was enough for him. He must have broken his neck. The nightstand was heavy. I took the gun from the dead man and hit the road that same night. And so I've been wandering around ever since. While the guest was telling his story, the Cossack was pondering his thoughts on him. He's a useful man, a dentist after all, if he's not lying. We should keep him. We're short on doctors. There's only one veterinarian for the whole area. Somehow, imperceptibly and very quickly, everyone began to treat Valya like one of their own. It was as if they'd known him for a long time and were glad their old friend had returned to the village after a long absence. The guest had a way of making people feel at ease. The dentist brushed crumbs from his black beard and removed his bandana, revealing a smooth, bald head. I've been thinking about Abkhazia lately. Do you think it's safer there than here? It seems like there are the same mountains and sea, but the climate is milder. So it's easier to survive the winter. That's true, but you'll be a stranger there, not a local. This is Russia after all, and they have their own customs there. Even though the people are hospitable, Oksana shared her thoughts. I have my doubts too. I'm even afraid, you could say, admitted the new acquaintance. Stay with us. We'll find you a house. We have gas, electricity, and running water, Fyodor suggested. The dentist glanced around at those present. Lucky you, a real oasis. Well, if no one minds.
There were no objections. Everyone except Boris had already taken a liking to the guest. "You can stay with the Greek," Marina said, a little embarrassed. "The house is small but well lived in a guarded part of the village." The dentist was a little wary. "And who is this Greek?" "He died recently. He lived alone and the house is empty now." "Come on, I can show you right away," Fyodor said, getting up from his chair without further ado. He really didn't want to let the doctor leave the village. Thus, Dalny received its own dentist. The small community gradually recovered from its losses. Life, despite all the difficulties, went on. Chapter 7. The Beginning. The wind whipped a fine dusting of snow through the deserted streets of a small Ural village. Herman sat on the ground, his back pressed against a leaning fence. He had been numb with cold overnight, but as soon as the sun rose higher and began to warm, the infected man's eyes opened slightly. Herman felt something gnawing at the fingers of his left hand. He felt no pain, but he turned his head trying to see what was happening. A skinny stray dog mistook his body for a frozen corpse and sank its teeth into his hand. The zombie barely moved its shoulder, but it was enough to drive the skittish animal away. The dog jumped back a few meters and froze in anticipation. Its fur and paws were shaking, but its gaze held the hope that the infected would now breathe its last. However, this morning, Herman had no intention of dying. His body temperature was gradually rising, warmth spreading through his muscles. The infected man propped himself up on one knee, made a great effort, and finally rose to his feet. The last of the snow fell from his head and back. The dog whined, watching its breakfast confidently come to life, tucked its tail between its legs, and took off running. The zombie instinctively followed the animal, but walked so slowly that it had no chance of catching the dog. Herman had recently turned 37. He was slightly above average height and strongly built, though he had been severely emaciated since his infection. The zombie hadn't eaten for 6 days and spent the nights outdoors, risking freezing to death each time. The Nova stubbornly maintained life in this body. It was only thanks to it that the infected man was still breathing. The Martian virus, which had become part of the human body, continued to tirelessly work on the host's survival. Herman's pain threshold increased so much that even after losing an ear in a fight, he barely felt anything. The Nova learned to control his body temperature, dramatically lowering it and putting his body into suspended animation to conserve energy, and conversely, warming his blood when he needed to run or fight. The infected had long since lost sight of the dog, but continued to move forward by inertia. His cracked sneakers left muddy tracks in the clean, fresh snow. Soon, there were more of these tracks, and the zombie spotted several of his fellow zombies ahead. There was almost no prey left in the village, and many of the infected wandered further and further into the surrounding area. The area was remote, and eventually, these cannibals froze to death in the Ural forests, completely exhausted. The Martian virus made the human body incredibly resilient and tenacious, but not immortal. Meanwhile, Herman turned onto a narrow, deserted street. He didn't feel like hunting with the other zombies today. About 15 minutes later, he found himself at the very edge of the village, and suddenly, with his only ear, he heard a drawn-out creak. The half-open gate of one of the houses swayed slightly in the wind. The infected followed the sound. He was used to trusting his instincts, though they had become of little use lately. Herman pushed open the gate and found himself on the property. An old, rusty car with flat tires was parked in the yard. The zombie circled it, not noticing any signs of life inside. The infected man approached the house and peered through the iron-barred window.
but the curtains obscured most of the room. Meanwhile, his intuition told him he needed to get inside. Hunger stabbed his insides like a thick needle, and the pain grew stronger with each passing day. Herman headed for the front door, leaned on it with both hands, and it suddenly swung open. He tripped on the high threshold, stumbled into the vestibule, and fell sprawled on the floor. Feeling no pain in his bruised knee, the infected man rose, took a few steps, and found himself in the kitchen. The last of the wood was burning in the stove, and a pile of dirty dishes lay in the sink. The house felt alive. The dried-out floorboards creaked with every step. Herman sensed he wasn't alone. His body temperature rose. He bared his teeth. Drool trickled down his overgrown chin, and a hoarse breath sounded in his throat. The infected man crossed the kitchen and found himself in the living room, his gaze gliding over the old, shabby furniture set, the tattered sofa, and the dusty plasma screen. Something glinted near the right wall, causing him to turn his head sharply. But it was only the sun reflected in a small round mirror inside the birdcage. Herman walked over to the wide walnut-colored dresser and sniffed the cage. Feathers, down, and parrot droppings littered the dirty tray, the bird scent still lingering. Suddenly, a faint creak was heard behind the wall, and the cannibal's pupils flared with malice. The thirst for the hunt grew stronger within him with each passing second, and only warm blood could quench it. The hall connected to the bedroom, but the infected man didn't immediately see the doorway. Long, thick, dark green curtains covered the archway, reaching all the way to the floor. The creaking sound came again, this time followed by a heavy, barely audible sigh. The zombie followed the sound, buried his nose in the fabric, and parted the curtains with his fingers. A large, dimly lit bedroom opened before him. A wide wardrobe that covered the entire wall, a small desk with a lamp, 2 iron beds, and a pair of chairs with long, thin legs. The cannibal's eyes took a while to adjust to the dim light that barely filtered into the room. But the scent of a living creature was especially strong here. Gradually, the outlines of objects became clear, and Herman saw a man. A gray-haired old woman lay on the bed under a thick camel hair blanket. She was covered almost to the top and breathing very quietly. The woman hadn't noticed the danger. She slept soundly. Only occasionally escaping from her old, wrinkled lips was a faint, painful groan. An hour ago, the woman of the house had taken a whole handful of sleeping pills. She couldn't bear it any longer. Her granddaughter, a 17-year-old girl, came to her aid. They came to an agreement, though the granddaughter had been reluctant for a long time. But her grandmother convinced her. The old woman's right side was paralyzed, and her illness left her bedridden. Death was only a matter of time. The girl helped her take a lethal dose of sleeping pills, then hugged and kissed her goodbye. The grandmother crossed her with her trembling left hand. "It's not such a sin, since the right one won't move," the old woman thought and whispered. "Don't close the door. Let it remain open. When a dead person is in the house, the doors are not locked. That's it. Now go. God be with you. You're strong. You can handle it. Goodbye. Goodbye. I love you. I love you so much." The granddaughter kissed her wrinkled forehead again, wiping the tears from her cheeks. The old woman sank tiredly onto the pillows. Drowsiness had already begun to overtake the woman. But she watched with her eyes as her granddaughter threw the backpack over her shoulders, stopped for a second in the doorway, looked at her grandmother for the last time, and left forever. Soon, Herman found the old woman unconscious, life barely flickering in her body. But that was more than enough for the hungry cannibal. He tore off the blanket and pounced on his prey. The infected's teeth sank into the wrinkled, flabby skin, and the zombie tasted the intoxicating taste of warm blood. The old woman no longer felt anything. After a few moments, her heart stopped beating. Herman tore off chunks of meat, licked up the blood, chewed and slurped for over an hour. Finally, he sprawled on the floor, squinting blissfully at the ceiling. A loud belch erupted from the cannibal's mouth. He folded his hands over his round, taut belly and breathed heavily, digesting human flesh. A couple of hours passed, and the zombie began gnawing on the frozen corpse again. This time, he ate slowly, calmly, and in no rush. Herman didn't feel hungry, but an inner voice insistently insisted that he needed to eat as much as possible. The infected tore himself away from the meat only when his jaws were barely moving, and his stomach threatened to burst from the weight. He hadn't felt this good in a long time. A sweet languor coursed through his body, and the zombie fell asleep on the floor. The house had already cooled. The chill had crept into the room, but here at least, there was no snow or freezing wind. Herman woke up around 3 in the morning, shivering and nauseous. A strange feeling, similar to the fever he'd felt when he'd been infected with Nova, had once again overtaken his body. Despite the cold, he was sweating profusely. His skin began secreting a sticky mucus, a wave of nausea rose in his throat, and thick brown foam began to ooze from his mouth. But the zombie seemed to have been expecting it. Instinctively, Herman began to cover his head and neck with foam, then his legs, stomach, sides, and anywhere else he could reach. Then he crawled under the bed, into the darkest, farthest corner, curled up in the fetal position, and fell asleep. Soon the foam and mucus hardened, forming a kind of protective cocoon. This shell allowed air to pass through, and despite the freezing temperatures outside, the interior of the cocoon maintained a comfortable temperature for survival. The Nova star placed the host in suspended animation, and Herman lay unconscious for a week. On the 8th day, he opened his eyes, but couldn't see anything through the gray haze. The infected stirred. The shell he'd been trapped in cracked with the sound of ripping paper. The zombie emerged from its cocoon, but it was no longer the same Herman. His entire body was covered in thick, short gray hair. His lower jaw had enlarged, and the skin on his face had darkened and become folded. The creature breathed heavily, puffs of steam escaping from its mouth. Herman struggled to his feet, his muscles greatly weakened by hibernation. The infected looked at the remains of the old woman and felt a burning hunger. He bit into the blued leg, but the flesh had frozen and become as hard as wood. Herman clenched his jaws with all his might, when suddenly, one of his teeth broke. He realized he wouldn't be able to snack on the frozen meat, so he looked around. A minute later, hunched over and stealthily stalking like a thief, Herman cautiously walked into the other room. He approached the window and took a deep breath, examining the landscape beyond. Outside, the sunset was fading in red hues. The village quickly plunged into twilight, and the zombies still wandering the area began to nod off as they walked. But Herman had already slept enough. Now, he felt it was high time to hunt. Chapter 8. Dry Goric led their small caravan along circuitous routes, avoiding Dagomis and the larger settlements. But you can't avoid every village. So, they sped through the deserted residential areas at full speed. Are they weakening, or is it just me? Leka asked, glancing casually at the skinny zombie. The infected one, leaning against the fence, only managed to turn his head toward the cars racing past. Who the hell knows? But the elands that attacked your village didn't seem weak. Max confirmed that no one was pursuing them and relaxed a little. Yeah, right. Those guys are real beasts. And they showed up in such a crowd. They broke down the fence, tore through the barbed wire with their flesh. We didn't expect them to be so fast. They all wander around like sleepwalkers at first. But when they spot prey, they immediately perk up. So I wouldn't even consider that dystrophic guy a weakling. Lyoka sped up a bit to catch up with Gora and Ivan's pickup truck. It's okay. They'll die sooner or later anyway. They definitely won't survive the winter in Siberia, but here they might hold out a little longer. How are you doing here? Oh, how? It's fine. The main thing is that it's warm. We've probably got snow by now. I'm eager to see the sea. Do you think it's still possible to swim? Leka yawned widely, covering his mouth with his fist. I wouldn't, but you can. You're Siberians and you swim in ice holes. I haven't tried the ice hole. They invited me, but I refused, admitted Owl, remembering his school friends. The road became completely bad. The cars barely moved, stumbling from bump to bump and carefully negotiating potholes. By evening, they drove through a tunnel under the railroad tracks and stopped on a rocky beach. Okay, we've arrived. The dock is over there, but we'll anchor here for now and have a look around. It's a deserted place. There's not much for zombies to do here. Gore explained about their choice of anchorage. Don't turn off the car yet. Vorobyov warned and climbed out. Pebbles crunched underfoot. The cosmonaut climbed onto a stone embankment with blackened sleepers and rusty rails. From here, the area was perfectly visible. Old breakwaters like tentacles extended into the sea, protecting the railway track. Ivan spent several minutes examining a small fishing pier, near which 3 abandoned boats bobbed in the waves. No activity was observed near them. Vorobyov returned to the pickup, and the 4 of them headed along the shore toward the pier. They walked carefully, slowly. The quieter you go, the longer you live. Even before, there weren't many people hanging out here except for fishermen. The locals would sometimes just swim, but usually the beach was almost always empty. Gorik seemed to be reassuring himself, constantly glancing over his shoulder, as if someone was watching his back. Ivan awkwardly stumbled over a cobblestone and swore quietly. What if we don't find the boat? Where do we go next? Well, the main option is Dagomis. There's bound to be something there. But sticking your nose in there, you know, the veterinarian replied without enthusiasm. Leka stepped over the broken wine bottle and looked at the sea. There's some big ship drifting over there. Gorik put his palm to his forehead. I see. But what's the point? Firstly, we need to swim to it. It's not close. And secondly, why the hell do we need such a huge thing? Do you know how much fuel it guzzles? It's not an electric car. A flock of seagulls flew over the boys' heads and quickly disappeared behind the pines on the hill. A few birds walked along the shore, waiting for crabs to crawl out from under the rocks. The salty sea air tickled their nostrils, smelling of iodine and rotting seaweed. But the wind was cool and no one felt like swimming. One of the boats was leaky, the second had no engine, and the third contained the half-decomposed body of a dog. However, it would have been impossible to sail in it anyway. "So are we heading to town? Is Dagames far from here?" Max asked Gorik. "It's getting dark. It'll be dark soon." "Maybe we should leave in the morning?" the veterinarian answered evasively. "Khan is sleepy at night and has poor vision. We can sneak through." "What if it's not zombies, but people?" "Who could have taken control of the port?" Leica objected. "Let's spend the night here in the cars. The morning is wiser than the evening." After some consideration, everyone agreed to this proposal. After all, they had prepared for this scenario. They had accomplished their goal for the day. They had reached the sea without casualties. The travelers began collecting firewood to start a small fire in the tunnel under the railway embankment. Seafood isn't just fish, crabs, mussels, and other creatures, but also logs, branches, and sticks thrown up by the waves during storms. There were plenty of such pieces scattered along this beach. The sun-dried wood quickly caught fire, and soon the whole group was warming dinner over the fire. They untied the ram's legs, gave him some hay, and tied him to the pickup truck. As often happens at sea, night fell quickly. It got even colder, but no one wanted to leave yet. The guys chatted around the campfire. Ivan and Max told the story of their escape from the burning monster. Then Gorik recalled a few funny stories from his work. Lyoka didn't say anything, but he questioned Vorobyov at length about the flight to Mars. When the conversation turned to Rich, the cosmonaut exchanged glances with Sova, and didn't mention that mysterious encounter on the road. "Better let them think he's dead. If I tell anyone else about aliens, people will go completely nuts from all this nonsense going on." Some other time, Ivan decided to himself. 2 men were on duty overnight and there were no incidents. But the morning began with an unexpected event. "Look, someone's swimming," Max shouted, spotting the boat first. "He rules here. Is it really for our souls?" Horace sighed, not knowing whether to rejoice or fear. "There's a boat coming our way, moving, that's good. Lyoka, get on the rails. You can provide cover from above. Gorik, you go behind those rocks, Max into the tunnel. If there's trouble, try not to hit me," Vorobyov said, taking his machine gun off safety and waiting. A small light boat gently rolled out onto the pebbles. A robust man of about 50 deftly jumped overboard, plunging his bare feet into the water up to his ankles. His 2 companions remained in the boat. The cosmonaut noticed they were carrying a pair of old Kalashnikovs. "Well, hello there, good man. What have you come for?" The man stepped onto the shore and extended his huge palm. "Dry." The handshake was firm. Vorobyov even mentally noted that it was too much. "Ivan, we need a boat, temporarily," the cosmonaut answered honestly, introducing himself. "Is Sukhoi a nickname or a surname?" Political credo. The man walked around him, examining him as if he were a statue in a museum. "I see D'Artagnan, but where are the 3 musketeers hiding? Whistle to them. Let them come out. Don't play hide and seek with me." The sailor spoke with a slight smile, but his tone was clearly laced with a very specific threat. Dry was of medium height, with a broad face, thick gray sideburns, and copper-colored skin. A striped vest peeked out from under a light windbreaker, while a knit cap and gray pants rolled up to the knees made up the rest of his wardrobe. Looking at his sinewy arms, you wouldn't want to arm wrestle him. He had a relaxed, yet confident and commanding demeanor. "What makes you think there are only 3 musketeers?"
Vorobyov glanced from the captain to his companions and noticed the tense faces on the boat. Two young men, slightly older than Max, nervously clutched their weapons. Yesterday there were 3, the new acquaintance replied with unshakable confidence. Though to me, 3 is as good as 33. If you think of any mischief here, we'll take you all down. We have eyes on both land and sea. You were just arriving, and we've already counted everyone. Ivan sensed the man was bluffing, but escalating the situation to a direct confrontation wasn't in their best interests. He turned and motioned for his friends to leave. Well, that's different, Sukhoi nodded with a satisfied expression, watching Max, Gor, and Leka approaching. Now tell me, Vanya, why do you need a boat? I need to get to Gelendzhik and back. I'm trying to find my parents. Sukhoi whistled thoughtfully, as if to say that this was a hopeless case. Did they live there, or were they on holiday? We were on vacation. I know the exact place. We need to check out this guest house.
The sailor crossed his arms over his chest, lowered his head, and began to walk along the shore. Well, going back and forth by boat is generally possible. How much will it cost? We'll give you the ram, the one in the pickup. There's also food, shoes, and gold. Dry winced. It's a long way to Gelendzhik. It'll use a lot of fuel. Okay, show me your stuff. He examined the ram, pulled out baskets of food and a box of shoes from the cabin. Oh, Valera, I think I found your size. Lucky you. Bigfoot, take it. The man tossed a pair of fashionable, expensive sneakers into the boat, the very same ones Max had previously taken from the corpse. The cosmonaut pulled his last trump card from his sleeve and handed over a bag of gold. The sailor examined the jewelry long and meticulously, weighed it in his palm, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his windbreaker. Share? Vorobyov asked impatiently. Dry, as if mockingly, shrugged his shoulders and grinned. Is that all? Do you have any weapons or ammunition? There is nothing extra. The sailor clicked his tongue in disappointment. We need to talk to the rest of our comrades. The fuel is ours to share. Got it? I'll pass on your proposal and come back. Wait here. The water foamed under the stern, and the man and his friends pushed off from the shore. Their boat quickly moved toward a large ship moored offshore. Max watched the boat go by with a sad look. That's fine. I haven't even agreed yet, but I've already taken the sneakers. And the gold, too. Ivan, too, felt a growing sense that they'd been ripped off like suckers at the market. But the cosmonaut remained silent, listening to the fading roar of the engine. Okay, the rest is ours for now. That Vrungel was practically salivating when he looked at the ram. I think we can come to an agreement. Gorik was the only one in the group who remained optimistic. The main thing is that they don't shoot us here like sheep. Lyoka looked around warily. I can feel in my bones that they're watching us. The ram bleated nervously and tugged at the rope. Gorik decided to go and pick some fresh grass for the cattle, grabbing Leka for cover. The others remained on the shore. They didn't have a viable plan B yet, so they had to wait and see. Chapter 9. Sailors.
2 empty tin cans burned to the last in the fire. The heat seemed to cause waves to run along the smooth tin edge, the metal sizzling and crackling. Other waves, cold and measured, tirelessly licked the rocky shore, crunching small pebbles and turning over cobblestones. The railway that ran alongside the beach hadn't seen any trains for a long time. Unlike the paved roads, it didn't look as neglected as the others. But weeds were already creeping up, gradually entangling the rocky embankment. Soon, the first young trees would appear here. And in 10 years, the rails and sleepers would be invisible even from a meter away. Nature quickly reclaimed its lost territories. Humans, meanwhile, huddled forlornly among the remnants of civilization, like a shivering traveler trying to warm themselves by a dying fire. But everything that humans had built over centuries, isolating themselves from nature, collapsed very quickly. Those who survived were forced to relearn how to survive. And they had to learn quickly, as time to adapt to the new reality was running short. Humans were still at the top of the food chain, but their position had now become extremely precarious. A colossus with feet of clay. That's what the former king of nature had become. The survivors were destroying each other in the struggle for unclaimed resources, further diminishing humanity's chances of maintaining its place in the sun. Ivan pondered these and other things, staring at the large boulder against which the waves crashed, spraying. Sooner or later, the sea would achieve its goal and break the boulder into several pieces, and then crumble it into tiny fragments. But that would happen a long time ago, when Vorobyov would no longer be alive. The sea, however, was patient, but the cosmonauts' patience was running thin. If this jerk doesn't show up in an hour, we'll pack up and head for Dagomis. We'll hide somewhere there and make our way to the port at night, Vorobyov said irritably. Gorik threw a flat pebble into the sea, and it bounced off the water a dozen times before sinking to the bottom. Maybe we should wait until the morning? I don't want to spend the night here knowing we're being watched. He made it clear he has people on land, too. And where we're moving to, do you think there won't be any? The veterinarian left the stones alone, shook his hands, and began chewing an apple. The cosmonaut turned towards the railway embankment where Leica was on duty. He can't be covering the entire coast, can he? Their ship is here. They're guarding this patch of land with the pier. I don't think they have enough people to cover such a large area. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been met by 2 students and a professor in a cap. I agree with this, but I suggest we wait until the evening. Soon, their patience paid off. 15 minutes later, 2 small dots separated from the larger ship and began to gradually grow in size. Ivan, Gore, and Max tensely watched the approaching boats. Only Lyoka remained on the rails to provide backup from the rear. The trio returned in the same group. Only Valera, wearing brand new, fashionable Max sneakers, arrived on a separate boat. Sukhoi climbed ashore, glaring sternly, even menacingly at the boys. Then a smile suddenly spread across his face. Why are you so gloomy, like you've been constipated for 3 days? We accepted your offer. We've reached an agreement. Let's have all your food with the ram.
Load it into Valera's boat.
Are we leaving now? The cosmonaut asked, just in case. Sukhoi looked at him as if he were a stupid little child. Well, whether you want it now or in a month, it doesn't matter to us. But we'll take everything you promised right now. And when you finally feel like going for a ride, it's your choice. Max whistled to Leka, and the four of them helped Valera load the ram, locked the cars, and climbed into the boat with Sukhoi and the other guy. He introduced himself as Vasyan. A minute later, the boats were already slapping the waves, quickly moving away from the beach. A slight nervous shiver ran down Vorobyov's spine at the thought of soon finding himself in Gelendzhik. He had no illusions about a happy reunion with his parents. But hope lingered despite the slim chances. His parents hadn't been vaccinated against rabies. At least, Ivan didn't remember it. Most of all, the cosmonaut feared encountering them in a crowd of infected people, with dull, hungry eyes, gray, peeling skin, and dried blood on their lips. He knew he could kill them, or at least he had determined to do so. The disease was irreversible, and there was only one way left: to spare his parents their suffering. He would kill them quickly and bury them properly if necessary. Suddenly, Valera's boat, which was following slightly behind, broke away and headed toward the larger ship, while Sukhoi steered northwest. Reading the passenger's thoughts, the sailor explained, shouting over the wind. "Valera, go to base. He won't come with us. Now here's the briefing. I'm the captain. Vasyan is my assistant. Rule number 1, and also rule number 1. While we're on the water, listen to what we say and don't argue. Anyone who breaks the rule is thrown overboard. No arguments." "Harsh," Max chuckled under his breath. Sukhoi adjusted his cap on the top of his head and, squinting slightly, looked at the teenager. "There's no other way, especially now. We'll take you to the shore, and then it's up to you, according to your own rules." The boat bounced and slammed its belly, as if it were asphalt beneath them, not water. Gorik was afraid the hull was about to fall apart, but Sukhoi maintained an unperturbed demeanor. This was somewhat reassuring. Lyoka and Max sat in the stern, exchanging occasional words. Sova mentally compared this vessel to their luxurious beluga, and slightly missed the yacht they'd been forced to abandon on the shores of the Caspian Sea. Suddenly, Gor leaned over the side with a groan. The veterinarian vomited, but before he could straighten up, he vomited again. The captain glanced at the poor fellow with indifference. "We don't have any seasickness pills. Sorry, bro. You'll have to be patient. It'll get better soon." But Gorik didn't feel any better. He sat there dejected, his face green, his hands and lips shaking, dreaming of reaching the shore as soon as possible. "How long will it take us to get there?" Vorobyov asked, already a little worried by the veterinarian's appearance. "By evening," Sukhoi promised evasively. Ivan sat closer to Max and Leka, deciding not to involve Gorik in the meeting for now. "We need to get there in the dark, while the cans are asleep. I'm pretty good at finding my way around the city." Leka shrugged his shoulders uncertainly. "It would be good to conduct reconnaissance. Observe the situation first. We might have to take a more roundabout route." "I would also look around calmly first," Max agreed. Sukhoi, noticing the negotiations, handed the helm to Vasyan and unceremoniously intervened in the discussion. "Listen, tell me this. Where do you need to go?" "To this guest house,"
In what part of the city is it located? Shevchenko Street. I don't remember the number, but I'll figure it out when I get there. Behind Spartak Stadium.
Drop us off at the central pier where the White Bride is, and then we'll take care of ourselves. Look at you, how quick. The captain clicked his tongue, scratching his sideburns. Maybe we should enter the bay with a salute and a cannonade, so everyone can see. No, we won't go all the way to the pier. I heard the bay is being held by either the cops or the bandits. I don't want to run afoul of either. It's a case of one thing and the other. Getting in is easy, but getting out. What do you mean, how? The cosmonaut was taken aback by this scenario. The sailor thought for a second, rubbed the tip of his nose and wrinkled his forehead. You will land on the thick cape. Where? At the lighthouse, perhaps? Vorobyov frowned. No, it's steep there. And the shore is so steep that it's hard to get close. Just around the lighthouse, that's where the embankment begins. And then we'll do it ourselves, on foot. Or you can hire a pedicab if you prefer, Sukhoi joked again. The cosmonaut stared at the waves flashing overboard. He considered the captain's words, weighing the pros and cons. If Sukhoi knew someone was holding the bay, then they shouldn't clash with the city's new authorities either. Who knows how it could end? On the other hand, if Gelendzhik's owners had organized some kind of commune from the surviving residents, then his parents could theoretically have joined it. Now we need to scout out the house where they were staying, and then act accordingly. It's a bit longer to walk from the thick cape than from the central pier, of course, but it's not critical. Vorobyov imagined a city map and mentally plotted a new route. Okay, let's do it your way. How much longer? Sukhoi looked at the horizon, then exchanged a few words with Vasyan and announced the decision. We won't make it today. It's dangerous to travel in the dark. The lighthouse is no longer working. Better safe than sorry. We'll stop in Divnomorsk before it gets dark, and tomorrow morning we'll move on from there. It's just a stone's throw away. Divnomorskoy? That's a village nearby, isn't it? Ivan wasn't surprised by this latest change in plans. Officially, it's a village, the captain corrected him. Or rather, it was. It's easy to moor there, even on a wild beach. Remember our tour operator's first rule? Listen and do what we say if you want to get there. If you don't like it, jump into the sea and paddle your way to Gelendzhik. It was difficult to argue with Sukhoi, and there wasn't much point. He wasn't backing down from his commitments, though he was hedging his bets. The wind had picked up slightly. Kilometers of waves and sea foam were already astern, and the target was just a short distance away. A day earlier, a day later, it didn't matter much. The boat's engine hummed loudly, and the small vessel steadily moved forward. Over there is the Divnoy city beach. We're almost there, the captain barked hoarsely. To starboard, several breakwaters stretched from the shore, protecting the rocky beach and embankment from storms. Previously, everything here would glow and shimmer with lights in the evenings. But now it had become gray and lifeless. A little further on is Fakel Beach. Sukhoi continued the excursion. We'll walk a little further and moor there. The boat gradually began to hug the shore. A large flock of seagulls flew overhead and disappeared from view. Other than the birds, no other signs of life were visible. Sukhoi slowed down, and the boat's tired engine hummed lazily. Vasyan climbed to the bow, carefully scanning the water, raised his hand, and the captain shut off the engine. Waves slapped against the side, pushing the boat toward the shore. A few moments later,
The soft scraping of the hull against the rocks was heard. "We're unloading," the captain ordered, which delighted Gorik beyond words. The veterinarian simply beamed with joy at the sight of dry land. The sailor sent the passengers to collect firewood along the beach, while he and Vasyan began setting up tents. "Aren't we going to get burned here?" Max sniffled, wiping his snot and looking around. "Zombies can't get here from Divnomorsk," Vasyan answered confidently. "There's a cliff jutting out into the sea. You'd have to wade through the water to get around it, and those creatures really don't like water. There's no point in them coming here. They're not going after crabs, are they? Unless they accidentally fall from above. But then they'd break everything they could." Ivan looked at the dark cliff that towered 20 meters away. Every now and then, small pebbles rolled down, as if someone were climbing the cracked, layered slope. Above, the gray silhouettes of pine trees swayed, their long roots clinging to the rock. The cosmonaut dragged a large piece of driftwood and tossed it toward the fire pit. With infected people, it's understandable. But what about people? What are they trying to gain here? There's nothing strategic or valuable here. Only if they're just tramps like us, Vasyan said, throwing up his hands. There used to be a legendary nudist beach here. People came from all over the country. Max looked at his new acquaintance with disapproval. "Are you a nudist or something?" "No, but I came here a few times with my girlfriend. We generally loved camping on wild beaches, so we'd drop by here sometimes," the guy replied, not particularly embarrassed. "And this girl?" Sova didn't have time to continue the question. Vasyan nodded his head, and everything became clear. Sukhoi decided to change the subject and clapped his hands. "Well then, fellow naturist tourists, let's divide up the responsibilities. I'll be cooking, since I don't trust any of you with such an important task as dinner. We'll split the night into 2 watches, 1 person each from you and 1 from us. I'll be on duty in the early morning, mind you." "Who's with me?" Ivan volunteered to keep the captain company. Leka and Vasyan took first watch. Max and Gorik were given the day off and the right to sleep all night. On land, the veterinarian quickly recovered, but he longed for the return trip to Dagomis. People huddled closer to the fire as the air had grown noticeably colder with the onset of darkness. Sentries occasionally strolled 100 meters from the camp, checking on the situation to ease their conscience. But no one tried to attack them, eat them, rob them, kill them, or ask for a cigarette. They were alone on this forgotten patch of wild beach. Another rock detached itself from the cliff, rolled along the shore and landed a meter away from the people. Sukhoi thoughtfully tossed a branch into the fire. Yeah, if the fragment was bigger, it might have had enough momentum to reach the tent. We should build a stone rampart out of cobblestones, at least 40 centimeters high to catch those pebbles. The shore is sloping, so you'll have to sleep with your feet facing the sea, and the head of your bed will be right next to the cliff. Yeah, I don't want to get my skull cracked in my sleep, Owl agreed. And without waiting for orders, he got to work. Well, since we're sleeping at night, we'll have to build, Gorik slowly joined Max. The boys quietly puffed, laying down hefty boulders. A granite barricade slowly but surely rose in front of the tents. Humans are creatures that can't sit still for long and are constantly tinkering with something around them. Leoka shivered from the breeze that blew in from the sea. I wonder if landslides happen here often. I'd like to believe not. These rocks are like layer cakes. Just touch them and they crumble. Vasyan tossed another stick into the fire, and a loud crack immediately followed. A column of sparks flew into the air, and Vorobyov grabbed his neck. Your mother, the bastard, It burned so much. The intense heat caused the stones in the fire pit to crack and shoot out tiny, red-hot fragments in all directions. Soon, a second crack was heard, and Sukhoi barely managed to dodge it. Well, now these fireworks will last a long time. I think I'll go to bed. We'll get up early tomorrow. Meanwhile, Ivan was grumbling and cursing, cooling his burn with seawater. A couple of minutes later, he too headed for the tent. Lyoka and Sova took their time, deciding to keep the guards company for now. By midnight, the wind had picked up even more, and the weather was changing. The roar of the waves alternated with the rustle of rocks rolling down the cliff. A huge moonlit path rippled across the surface of the water, illuminating the shoreline. It seemed as if the sea too was freezing and trembling. Soon, clouds covered the sky and obscured the moon, and the sea disappeared from view. Where the water had once lapped, only a vast, pitch-black darkness remained. Ivan lay in his tent, unable to sleep. The roar of the waves seemed to emanate from the breathing of a huge, living creature nearby. It seemed to be creeping up on him, but hesitant to attack. Chapter 10. Lab rats Katya and Lena wandered the bunker's corridors, curiously exploring every nook and cranny of the underground shelter. Engineer Kalmakov, whom they called simply Zhenya, happily agreed to act as the girls' tour guide. He understood that since the men had arrived with the president, it was worth befriending them. On the other hand, this might anger Malishkina. Kalmakov sensed that a serious clash between her and Kornilov would sooner or later erupt, but he hadn't yet decided whose side to take. Yevgeny decided to balance between these two camps for as long as possible, trying to be useful to both leaders. "What do you have here?" Lizitsina stopped in front of an unassuming gray door.
This is the brain of the entire center. A bunch of servers that keep the bunker's life support system running. Temperature, humidity, air and water quality, power supply, food consumption monitoring. All of this is analyzed and controlled by these things. The girls found themselves in a small room where there were 4 gray cabinets, inside of which dozens of light bulbs were blinking. "So this base is controlled by artificial intelligence?" Lena listened to the quiet hum of the instruments. "Well, intelligence is a bit of a stretch. More like a smart algorithm. Intelligence can create things on its own, while our system just makes sure everything works as it's configured." Katya shivered. It was chilly in the server room. "And how many people can survive here at the same time?" "Much more than we have now. The majority of the elite wanted to remain in the capital. Besides, we lost a lot of people during the rebellion. An epidemic isn't enough for people. They still continue to destroy each other." Lysitsina sighed. "And Moscow probably has the biggest bunker?" "Yes, central. But Lev Nikolaevich decided to take refuge here." Kalmakov trailed off mid-sentence. The engineer decided there was no point in telling the story of how the president's wife and daughter died in the Kremlin lab again. To be honest, bunkers like these look cooler in science fiction movies. Lena smiled and exchanged glances with her friend. "Yes, we're a bit poor but clean. Nothing extra," Evgeny agreed. "It's a concrete cellar where you just need to sit out the hard times. I think they'll run out soon. Andrei and Masha will definitely find a vaccine," Katya said without a shadow of a doubt. Meanwhile, Kuznetsov and Vorobyova were assisting local medics with rabies vaccinations. The news that this vaccine protects against the zombie virus sparked jubilation in the shelter. However, Andrei clarified that this was only his and Masha's assumption. "Most of the healthy people we met along the way had been vaccinated against rabies, but we haven't conducted enough research yet, so we can't give a 100% guarantee. It takes time, a lot of time. However,
I am confident that rabies vaccination can significantly reduce the risk of accidental infection. The frightened bunker residents, who hadn't even dreamed of such a chance until recently, clung to any hope, so they lined up for the vaccine without any orders or instructions from their superiors. Professors Andre and Masha didn't mention the vaccine for now. There wouldn't have been enough for everyone anyway. But the strategic storage facility had plenty of modern rabies medication. Before moving here, Malishkina made sure the local pharmacy was fully stocked. Previously, treatment for rabies required 6 injections over 3 months. But in 2025, scientists succeeded in creating a new drug, BANV, a bioactive anti-rabies nanovaccine. This treatment defeated the virus in just 2 injections. It helped produce antibodies much more quickly, with the interval between the first and second injections now being 14 days. When Masha finished with another patient, a pretty girl approached her and shyly asked, "I heard what you said about contraindications, but I'd like to ask for some further advice. I'm about 8 weeks along. Is there a significant risk of getting the vaccine at this stage?" Milana ran her hand over her stomach, her large, beautiful eyes filled with sadness and worry. Masha didn't know that this young woman was largely responsible for the dramatic changes that had taken place in the shelter. Milana was General Gornilov's youngest daughter. After the coup, Chernov had made her his concubine, and now she was carrying his child. At first, Milana considered having an abortion, but then decided to keep the baby. He's the future of this world. I believe the child will be better than his father. Give him a chance. Don't kill him. Her sister pleaded, and Milana agreed. Vorobyova bit her lip in puzzlement, looking at the girl. If you stay in the shelter until the baby is born, I don't think vaccinations will be necessary yet. In the past, if you were infected with rabies, they would administer the vaccine, regardless of contraindications. Otherwise, it would be death. But it's safe here. The virus won't get in, and you shouldn't leave the shelter anyway, so I'd hold off on the shots for now. What should I do when the baby is born? We'll discuss it then. I hope we'll have created a 100% safe cure for the zombie virus by then, Vorobyova said, squeezing Milana's hand in a friendly manner. The vaccination campaign was over. Scientists could finally calmly formulate a plan of action. Yeah, I thought the government lab in the secret bunker would be better equipped, Kuznetsov said, looking around the equipment he was about to work with disappointment. Masha crossed her arms and sat on the edge of the table. Listen. We couldn't even dream of this recently. I never dreamed of any of this. I dreamed of a house by the sea, my own boat to fish in the sunset, and lounging naked on the beach with Katya. Instead, we signed up to sit in this tin can for who knows how long. You understand, it's not a week or a month. How many tests and studies need to be conducted? First on animals, then on people, before we can be sure the vaccine is safe and works, if we can even create one. Andre pulled off his glove and threw it at the wall. Masha suppressed her anger and the urge to launch into another tirade about her responsibility for the fate of humanity. But suddenly the reason for her colleague's behavior dawned on her. She quietly approached him from behind and gently hugged him by the shoulders. Kuznetsov even flinched in surprise, as if he'd been electrocuted. He'd been bracing himself for a lecture on irresponsibility and selfishness. But this turn of events left him stumped. Masha, meanwhile, pressed her cheek against his and whispered softly in his ear. I know you're worried. Everyone's looking at you, expecting a miracle. I'm scared too, scared of failure. We have a difficult task, but we can do it. Together. I know it for sure. Step by step, experience by experience. We will defeat this nasty virus. We will solve this problem. You can do it. We can do it. Andre felt a drop of sweat appear between his shoulder blades and run down his spine. Phew, I'm so excited. You're a psychologist too, it turns out. Yeah, you're right. I'm really afraid of screwing up. We couldn't do it that time in Novosibirsk. We had almost no time. The building was without power. And here no one is rushing us. We will work calmly. At these words, the soft click of heels was heard, and Elena Vasilyevna Malishkina entered the laboratory. Her wavy blonde hair was neatly pulled back into a bun, and her gray, knee-length business skirt matched her pale blue blouse. The official's lips stretched into a formal, welcoming smile. Her whole demeanor attempting to convey a welcoming demeanor. But her small, sharp eyes scanned the newcomers with a keen, proprietary gaze. So, how are you here? Are you settling in? Everything you need is at your disposal. If you need anything, just let me know. Perhaps you need some more help? For example, Yulia Vladimirovna is an excellent doctor, but Andrei didn't let her finish her sentence and interrupted Malishkina not very tactfully. I spoke to her. She's a surgeon. We have different specifics. I don't see the point in distracting her. Honestly, we'll be more comfortable working with our own team. Well, whatever you say, Elena Vasilyevna pursed her lips resentfully. It's your choice. The main thing is the result. By the way, if the rabies vaccine works so well, why develop another drug? These are just our observations, not backed up by experiments. Let's just say we proposed vaccination as a precaution. We'll be able to begin the first mass laboratory studies in this area in 2 weeks, after we've given everyone booster shots according to the vaccination schedule. Masha explained delicately. Unlike Andrei, she was more diplomatic. And what if in 14 days we find that the rabies vaccine is sufficient to fight the zombie virus? Malishkina adjusted her rectangular glasses on her nose. She was no longer smiling, but was looking inquisitively at the president's men. Vorobyova expected this question. Even if that's true, a more advanced drug is needed. Antibodies to rabies take at least 2 weeks to develop, and a healthy person becomes a zombie within 24 hours of infection. This means we need a treatment that will suppress the disease in less than 24 hours. Malishkina nodded her head out of habit, agreeing with her interlocutor's arguments. Andrei preferred to remain silent, so Masha continued. People can't live in a bunker forever. Sooner or later, they'll have to get to the surface. We don't know how long the virus will stay in the atmosphere, and it could also be carried by animals. Animals themselves aren't infected. We haven't seen a single zombie animal, even though we've traveled halfway across Russia. But dogs or foxes, for example, could very well become carriers, as is the case with rabies. That needs to be studied too. It's painstaking work, Kuznetsov muttered, examining the instrument sterilizer. There was nothing remarkable about the device, but Andrei preferred to stare at it rather than meet Elena Vasilyevna's gaze. Yes, it's a very important issue, Masha agreed with her colleague. But even more important is the issue of children. You have a pregnant woman, Milana, I believe. Yes, poor girl, she's been through so much. We were friends with her father, may he rest in peace, Malyushkina said, looking up at the glowing ceiling. Vorobyova paused, trying not to interrupt the official. So, imagine she gives birth outside the bunker, on the surface. Even if we give her a rabies vaccine, the baby won't be immune. That means from the first hours of life outside the mother's body, the baby will be at risk. The zombie virus is transmitted through the air, and the baby could become infected at any moment. The rabies vaccine won't have time to work, and every baby faces this risk. To survive, humanity needs a cure that works very quickly. A quarter of an hour later, Elena Vasilyevna left the lab, leaving her friends alone. Malyuskina had taken a liking to Masha and was already making plans to win her over. The official would have preferred to get rid of Andrei, but since he had been introduced as a leading virologist, she had to put up with him for now. She's a sly woman, you can tell right away. She looks like a rat, Kuznetsov muttered very quietly as the friends gathered in a tight circle. By the way, about the rats, we'll soon be in great need of them, and there are only 2 of them in the lab. We'll need a lot more. Vorobyova frowned, wondering where to get experimental animals. You and I are 2 lab rats, Masha, Andrei remarked sarcastically. And life is experimenting on us. Will we get out of this mess with the antivirus, or will we throw up our hands?